All right. Everybody could take their seat and get comfy. Welcome everybody to the 2024 Virginia Water Monitoring Council Conference. We're excited to be here at a new venue this year. My name is Liz Chidoba. I'm with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm the chair of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council Steering Committee. And I'll be your moderator for the morning presentations. I would also like to introduce my colleague, Sam Puckett, in the back. Sam is with the Isaac Walton League of America. She's the vice chair of the steering committee, and she'll be moderating our afternoon sessions with us today. Today we have 8 speakers who have joined us, and the conference will consist of presentations followed by opportunities for questions. We are recording this on Zoom, so we will come around with a microphone to ask any questions, so the questions can be heard by everybody and also captured in the recording. So just raise your hand for questions and we'll come around with a microphone to ask. We also have some breaks planned throughout the day. There's refreshments in the back. Please help yourself. And we encourage you to use the breaks for networking opportunities and meet some new folks throughout the room. As I mentioned, we are recording the presentations today, and we will post them to our YouTube channel in the coming days. We'll send the link out we'll be posting the recordings that we have permission to post. There are 2 presentations today that we will not be recording. And then we'll send the link out to everybody who's registered after once that's posted on YouTube. So before we begin our presentations, we have a couple announcements and some housekeeping items to go through. First, I would like to tell you a little bit more about the Virginia Water Monitoring Council, and I invite you to join our organization if you are not currently a member. The Virginia Water Monitoring Council encourages collaboration among water monitoring programs in Virginia, and the council promotes communication through our weekly emails of water-related meetings, educational events, publications, and job opportunities from across Virginia and beyond. We currently have 800 members who represent more than 275 organizations, and our membership represents diverse interests from local governments, state and federal environmental agencies, colleges and universities, consultants, industry, and citizen scientists. Anyone with an interest in water monitoring is invited to join, and the membership is free. If you are not a member, you're welcome anytime. Just send an email to the email listed up on the slide with your name and your monitoring affiliation. And then you can also learn more about the council from our website, which is also listed here. So we hope that you can join the council if you're not already a member. No, not yet. Okay. We'd also like to recognize some individuals in our audience today. First, we have 2 scholarship recipients with us. Each year, we honor the memory of Ken Brooks by providing conference scholarships in his name. Ken was a longtime member of the council steering committee, a volunteer water monitor, and a strong proponent of getting young people involved in water monitoring. This year, we awarded the scholarship that covered the conference registration fee for 2 students who are both members of the council. As I call your name, please raise your hand or stand. Stephanie Latorno and Tabitha King. Welcome. Stephanie is a graduate student at the Marine Science at the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, and Tabitha is a graduate student at George Mason University in Environmental Science and Public Policy. She is conducting research on PFAS in the Potomac River. So please introduce yourself and during our lunch breaks and get to know them a little bit more. So welcome and congratulations for the scholarships. All right. Additionally, I would like to thank all who helped make today's events possible. The members of the council steering committee planned today's conference with input from last year's participants, The steering committee members have also worked on many behind-the-scene tasks. For all the steering committee members, I think most everybody's in the back, but please stand or raise your hand to let everybody know you're on the steering committee. Thank you for all of your work putting on today's conference. Feel free to ask anybody questions about the council or the steering committee. We also want to thank all of our presenters who have given their time and are providing their expertise today. We thank you for participation in today's event. Without your interest and support, this event would not be possible. And then last, we'd like to extend a special thank you to our exhibitors. U.S. Geological Survey, YSI, I will be GAIAX. Sorry, I forgot to ask before starting. And Tech Zone MD. U.S. Geological Survey, or the USGS, is a federal agency that conducts applied scientific research so that policymakers and the public have the understanding they need to address complex environmental, natural resource, and public safety issues. We have with us today Aaron Porter from the USGS Virginia and West Virginia Water Science Center. The center delivers timely and reliable data, advanced interpretive science, and tools needed to understand the water resources of Virginia and West Virginia in support of effective decision-making. Next, John Zimmerelli has provided informational materials about YSI, which you can find back at the registration table. There's magazines and business cards for him, as he was not able to make it today. YSI is part of Xylem Incorporated, a global company focused on solving challenging and fundamental water issues. YSI provides laboratory and field instrumentation and custom integrated systems. We also have Dietrich, who is the founder and CEO. GAIAX. Great, thank you. This company offers portable water monitoring systems suitable for K-12 education, citizen science, universities, and volunteer organizations. The company strives to merge the accuracy and precision of laboratory instrumentation with the ease of use and price of consumer electronics. The sensors read temperature, turbidity, salinity, pH, dissolved oxygen, and other parameters. Once removed from the water, the device automatically displays the data and uploads it to the cloud, where it is accessible for review and analysis. Lastly, we have Najma with TechZone here to answer your questions about the Water Quality Data Acquisition Solution, WQDAS. This tool is designed to streamline the process of consolidating, validating, analyzing, assessing, and sharing data for water quality monitoring projects. It's suitable for federal, state, local, and citizen monitoring groups. The tool supports the storage of data from both continuous and discrete monitoring. It also includes features for calculating indices of biological integrity for fish and benthic macroinvertebrates, as well as biological and habitat scores. The tool can integrate reporting, assessments, and support for Section 319 grants, Section 305B and 305D assessment reports, and MS4 permits. Additionally, TechZone offers a wide range of services, including the development of mobile and web applications, business software solutions, and software integration. They also provide support and maintenance for software applications, specifically tailored for environmental projects. We appreciate the support given by these exhibitors, so please take some time to visit them at any of the breaks and during lunch. Lastly, organizing today's conference required help from many other organizations. Partnering groups that made the conference possible include the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, with funding from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for supporting the council's outreach activities, the Virginia Public Safety Training Center, today's venue, for providing today's meeting space and helping with the audio-visual aspects of the conference. And a special thank you to Brandy for making us feel so welcome and helping to coordinate everything. The Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, who supported the event, especially Sophie, who handled all of the registration. and the Virginia Water Resources Research Center at Virginia Tech for promoting the conference and helping with communications. All right, almost ready to begin. Just a couple housekeeping items. In case of emergency, we can exit the building in the back. There's doors on either side of the building. All of the doors are unlocked and open, so please use any of the doors. The restrooms are located directly in the back of the room. And as a reminder, please silence your cell phone so you don't interrupt the presentations. If you need to have a conversation, please step outside to do so. Again, the doors are open, unlocked. You can come and go as you need. After each presentation, we will have time for Q&A. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we'll come around with a microphone so we can capture the questions for the so everybody can hear the questions and we can capture them on the recording. At the end of the day, we will provide certificates of attendance. Please feel free to use your certificate if you want to seek continuing education or professional development credit. We will distribute the certifications after the last speaker, so you will need to stay till the end. Last but not least, following the conference, we will send a link to an online conference evaluation form. We also will have some QR codes around the room. We ask that you please fill out the evaluation forms. They're really helpful in giving us feedback for how we can make things better next year, and specifically get some ideas for speakers and or topics that you all want to hear about. So that concludes our announcements for this morning. And now we will start to hear from our presenters. Our first presenter is Marissa Roland. Marissa works with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation at the Division of Soil and Water Conservation. Marissa began her career with DCR as the program assistant for the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share, or VACS program, where she worked on creating and updating best management practice specifications. Then she became the Conservation District Coordinator, who worked with soil and water conservation districts to carry out the VACS program. Currently, Marissa is the Eastern Area Manager, where she oversees a diverse technical staff of nutrient management specialists, conservation district coordinators, and shoreline engineers housed in the eastern part of the Commonwealth. So welcome, Marissa.
Can everybody hear me okay? I speak softly, so I have to ask. Thank you very much for that introduction. As Liz mentioned, I am Marissa Roland with the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, Eastern Area Manager currently. I am here to talk about an overview of agricultural BMPs and the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program as a whole. DCR does have a dedicated program manager who this is their entire job, is our VACS program. Her name is Sarah Bottenfield. Unfortunately, she could not be here today. I will have my contact information at the end of my slides, and if you want to get connected with her, you can just reach out to me. So this is kind of a roadmap of where we're going to be going through my presentation today. I'm going to start with an introduction to Virginia's agricultural BMP program. You'll hear me refer to that as the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program, BMPs, VACS, they're all the same thing. So in that introduction, I will talk about the purpose of the program. I'll talk about the history. I'll touch a little bit on the eligibility and how it works. And then we'll get into common agricultural BMPs and their water quality connections. So the purpose of the VACS program, what's the point? It's a water quality improvement program created to reduce non-point sources of pollution, such as nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, sediment and bacterial contamination, done so through the implementation of best management practices. I'll talk a little bit about this when I talk about the history, but we started with one best management practice in the Commonwealth of Virginia and now have a suite of over 70 to choose from. Some partners address additional resource concerns, but you'll hear me say this throughout my presentation. VACS is strictly water quality. It always has been. It's got a very, very narrow focus on water quality. Some of our other partners, which I'll talk about later, focus on additional resource concerns like soil health, air pollution, animal, and additional concerns, but I'm going to mainly be focusing on water quality. And just an example of that, our partners at the Natural Resources Conservation Service have resource concerns related to soil, water, animals, plants, air, human, and energy. The VACS program is funded by the taxpayers of Virginia for best management practices. The VACS program is a line item in the General Assembly budget every year. Those funds come from the Water Quality Improvement Fund, the Virginia Natural Resources Conservation Fund, and other sources, but it is funded by taxpayers. Currently, under fiscal year 2025 program guidelines, the VACS program provides $300,000 per participant per year for practices in our program. And then finally, another big point I want to hit on is the VACS program is completely voluntary. DCR is non-regulatory. We're not here to fine anybody. We're not here to get anybody in trouble. It is strictly a voluntary program. People participate because they have a resource concern they want addressed. And then to just kind of wrap up the purpose, in addition to that funding, which is given on a reimbursement basis, so after you complete the practice, there is funding for technical assistance, as well as potentially tax credit to support voluntary BMP implementation. And then, like I mentioned, there are over 70 practices now available in the program. So just a little history on the VACS program. How did we get where we are today? So the program officially began 40 years ago in 1984 with the goal of improving the quality of water entering the Chesapeake Bay and the Chowan River. Over the years, there's been increasing focus on the Chesapeake Bay watershed, with funding being split 70-30, 30% of that going to Southern rivers. It has always been a program to provide financial incentives to producers. Originally, it only covered 68 counties of Virginia. It has now expanded to the entire Commonwealth. And actually, it only started with one eligible best management practice, which was your cattle exclusion. Just a few years later, it expanded to 6 eligible practices, a lot of which you can still see today in our program. So just 4 years later, the program began to encompass the entire state, although the amount of financial incentives and eligibility varied. However, a lot of this remains true today, how the program operates. So the funds come through DCR and they are distributed to soil and water conservation districts based on how agriculture affects water quality in that area. Local district board of directors approve the prioritization of applications, and the districts funded applications with the greatest likelihood of improving water quality. The program has expanded considerably in the last few years. Funding has always been up and down. However, in the last few years, it's been up and up. So the prioritization of practices, I don't want to say has fallen by the wayside, but almost everything that people want to get funding for, they're able to, dependent upon reaching eligibility, because there's so much money available in the program. As I mentioned, there's been increased emphasis on the Chesapeake Bay over the last few years. And like I said, funding levels have gone up and down. Every year since I have started at DCR, we have said that we have had a record funding level. And that does not continue, or excuse me, that does continue. It doesn't look to be going away anytime soon. The record in 2024 was 124 million. Going into fiscal year 25, it's something like 200 million. Then looking at a little bit more than that in fiscal year 2026. So just the last part of the introduction to the program is the eligibility. How are you able to participate in the program? And there's really 3 key items. So the land must be used in a bona fide program of agriculture, whether that's agricultural, horticultural, or forest products for market. You have to have a minimum of 5 contiguous acres, so they all have to be touching. And then you have to verify gross receipts in excess of $1,000 per year for the last 3 years. This ties the eligibility to the land and not the producer. So you can be a brand new producer who just came into your 5 contiguous acres. So long as you are able to verify those gross receipts, you are able to participate in the program. That was my introduction to the program. Now I want to talk about the actual best management practices themselves. So there's really 4 categories we think of our practices in. Those are cropland and nutrient management, animal waste, stream exclusion and protection, and forest buffers. So as far as cropland and nutrient management, what are the resource concerns that result from those? So potential water quality impacts include erosion of soil from crop fields that are left fallow or bare or with minimal cover, leaching of runoff of nutrients remaining in the soil after a harvest, as well as runoff of those nutrients applied at a rate, location, or time that cannot be taken up by the crop. So how do we address these? The first step, really your ticket into the door, is nutrient management planning. That's applying nutrients in the right place, at the right time, in the right quantity. DCR have several staff, at least 5 in the East, who write nutrient management plans at no cost to the farmer. Our soil and water conservation districts do receive funding to pay for a private planner to do it, but DCR does do it for free. And like I mentioned, this is kind of your golden ticket. This is a requirement for most of our cropland and other precision nutrient management practices. This is how you receive funding eligibility for many more BMPs. Another way we address issues with cropland and nutrient management is cover crops. So cover crops, they establish a vegetative cover after harvest and at other times where your fields might be bare or fallow. There's lots of options. Lots of them are widely used. Actually, the presenter after me is a former DCR nutrient management planner who does play around with and test different cover crops to figure out what works best for him. Cover crops also reduce erosion by holding down that soil and then taking up any excess nutrients left after harvest. The premier practice in the VACS program is our cover crop practice. It pays quite a bit, and that is focused on planting rye. So you've done basic cover crops, you've got a nutrient management plan, you've been managing your fields, and you want to be a little bit more precise about when you are applying nutrients and when. And that's where our precision nutrient management practices come in. Those reduce any excess nutrient application and loss of nutrients through leaching and runoff with a rain event. And it's applicable to nitrogen and phosphorus, commercial fertilizers, and your manure application as well. Manure, under our animal waste category, we've got a couple more practices to address that as well. Animal waste, speaking of. So what are the potential water quality impacts from animal waste? Obviously, runoff from manure and waste stored outdoors. Poor timing of land application of waste due to a lack of storage. If you don't have anywhere to put it, you need to get rid of it. Manure and sediment runoff from concentrated animal areas exacerbated by a lack of vegetation. So how do we address these? We put in place systems to manage the waste from areas where livestock and poultry are confined. So that's a litter shed. At least you have a place to store it. As well as reduce nutrient and pathogen runoff from waste and reduce sediment runoff from any barren areas where livestock are concentrated. It also allows the waste to be collected and stored for use at a fertilizer at appropriate, again, rate, time, and placement. And it's not just cows, hogs, I've seen goats as well to be included in some of these practices. Stream exclusion and protection. I mentioned earlier, this was the focus of the VACS program originally. What are the potential water quality impacts? Stream bank erosion caused or exacerbated by livestock access to the areas. Direct deposition of waste into waterways from cows wandering into the stream. And then overgrazed pastures and riparian areas, which make for poor filters for pollutants carried by overland flow. So how do we fix that? One of the other premier practices in the VACS program is our cattle exclusion practice. So that includes not only exclusion fencing from waterways, sometimes hardened access. It includes water troughs, so an alternate water source as well. So again, one of the premier practices and one that's been kind of the longest enduring in the VACS program. So it eliminates or reduces livestock access to streams by fencing them out. They literally cannot get in the water. And it reduces that erosion and the direct deposition and runoff of manure as well. It can be combined, like I mentioned, with enhanced grazing management and or tree planting. So in addition to your waterers, your fencing, you can also plant in the buffer itself. And I mentioned earlier that the cost share program is reimbursement. A lot of times it's a percentage or a flat rate. This practice specifically, if you create the largest buffer, is potentially 100% cost share. And that's because of the reductions that we receive as a result of taking those cows out of the stream. Kind of the final category of BMPs is our forest buffers. So this kind of ties into your stream exclusion, potential water quality impacts, again, runoff from pasture and crop fields. They carry pollutants a lot more easily to the stream or whatever sensitive feature. And then stream bank erosion due to a lack of stabilizing vegetation. So the solution is to put a buffer in place, a forested buffer. Again, this reduces the sediment from stream bank erosion, provides filtering of pollutants, and the key is really 35 feet. That's kind of our minimum in the program. It's a lesser reimbursement rate. However, that seems to be kind of the sweet spot. The higher rate you get at 50 feet. Kind of the more land you are putting into your forested buffer, the more reductions you're getting. It's less area for your cows, so we do reimburse at a higher rate. Just a mention of some other agricultural BMPs. I haven't seen these used quite as much, but they do exist in the program. We have agricultural sinkhole protection, fuel storage treatment. So that is for underground farm fuel storage that is replaced with above ground. And then capping and plugging of abandoned wells to prevent groundwater pollution. So agriculture and water quality. I'm going to present some graphs and some data on the screen. I'm not going to offer a lot of interpretation. It's mostly to show over the years with the VACS program how the reductions in our nutrients going into our water have been on the decline. This information is from the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. This first graph is the nitrogen loads. So as far as our water quality goals go, we've reached our sediment goals. We're getting closer on nitrogen and phosphorus, but a majority of the remaining reductions needed are going to be in the agricultural sector. So this is nitrogen and then phosphorus. We're getting closer. This is specifically the Potomac Basin. Again, the trend seems to be upwards, downwards. This trend is related to population growth and land use change. And then phosphorus again for the Potomac Basin. Really quickly, I want to hit on how the program is carried out across the Commonwealth. So VACS is a DCR program. The money from the General Assembly comes to us. However, the work that we do, putting these practices on the ground, getting conservation on the ground, could not be done without the partnership of soil and water conservation districts. There are 47 across the state, and they tailor their prioritizations to the local needs, the local water quality needs. They provide technical assistance. So whether that's conservation planning, going out to a farm, figuring out what's your resource concern, what's going to be the best program for you. They carry out educational initiatives, so educating their localities. They promote the VACS program as well as voluntary actions to be taken by landowners as well. And then I know the next speaker, Bob Waring, is going to talk about some more of those local priorities and programs that they have created. So I just wanted to shout out soil and water conservation districts because truly having a $200 million program, DCR could not do it by ourselves. And then finally, as I mentioned several times, funding and technical assistance for the VACS program is provided through those districts. So if you're interested, the best place to find out your district, as well as who to get in contact with, website information, things like that, will be through the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts. There should be a map that shows you your local district with some contact information. And then finally, I just want to talk about some other sources of technical expertise and funding opportunities. Like I said, VACS is a strictly water quality program. Other partners offer different funding opportunities for other resource concerns, such as the Natural Resource Conservation Service and Farm Service Agency. I mentioned them earlier in my presentation. The Department of Forestry, I talked about forested buffers. Department of Forestry is very into buffers. Department of Environmental Quality has Section 319 grants, and then nonprofit organizations in the localities as well. So your James River Association, Friends of Groups, and others also provide funding opportunities, a lot of times in tandem with these other partners as well. And that's all I have. Like I mentioned earlier, my contact information is up here. Feel free to reach out. Sarah Bottenfield, again, is the program manager. This program is her baby. So if you reach out to me, I can get you in contact with her for further questions.
Well, thank you, Marissa. Do you have any questions? I have a question for you. So how many, with the funding that you have, how many farmers do you typically, or producers do you typically work with in a year?
I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. It's quite a few, and it varies by locality. I showed the Potomac Basin, and I talked about land use change and urban populations increasing. It really varies depending on what part of the state you're in.
Gotcha. And do you happen to know how many practices each farm might implement? Like, I assume they're doing probably more than one thing at a time.
Sure. In the east, it's mostly going to be your crop practices. So that's going to be a nutrient management plan, plus your cover crop. Some might be doing precision nutrient management as well. I did not mention it in my presentation, but one of the best management practices we have is called the whole farm approach. And that takes a lot of your common nutrient management and cover crop practices and bundles them all up. So a producer could sign up for every nutrient management and cover crop practice we have at one time. So it depends.
Any other questions out there? All right. Well, thank you, Marissa. All right, up next we have Bob Waring from the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. Bob was born and raised in Essex County, Virginia, and graduated from Randolph-Macon College in 1992. He works for the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District as a senior conservation specialist. He co-manages Brandon Farms, a third-generation family farm where they integrate cover cropping systems to increase soil health. Brandon Farms was selected as a case study with the American Farmland Trust, a national organization that highlights farms across the U.S. that practice the highest levels of conservation and sustainability. Brandon Farms has also been involved with Virginia Tech as a farm co-operator on phosphorus and sulfur experimentation as a participant in the Precision Sustainable Agricultural Cover Crop Project. The farm has also participated in research with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, and local soil and water conservation districts. So welcome, Bob.
Come out. I don't speak softly, so. And I can't stand still, so, this thing will come with me. Thank you. I appreciate being here. I'm here in two capacities. So I am with the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. I was with DCR for 19 years. I was a nutrient management specialist out of Tappahannock, where Marissa is now. Thank you, Marissa, for that overview. That's a lot of what I did when I was there in nutrient management, cover crops. I'm also on the family farm, Brandon Farms. We're in Dunsville, just we're about 45 minutes east of here on the Rappahannock River. I always put, and today's presentation is kind of going to be it's going to be on both sides of things. It's going to be how the farm, how I see things from the farm and conservation, and how we're going to bring that forward with Colonial. I always put this picture up here. These soybeans right here, we think that crops are alive, and we don't always think about them in this capacity. But that was right there. That picture was taken before a 1-inch rain. And if you can see, my wife and I were walking, and that's not typically what they look like, but the leaves cup up right before a rain. If you ever look at a soybean field, and that's what these plants do. They cup their leaves and they're ready for that water. So always keep that in mind, that what we're dealing with are things that are natural. These guys, these warthogs, I don't know, they beacon on my farm. They come over and I take pictures of them. My son is in the Navy. He's headed to California, probably arriving today as a medic. My wife is a nurse. My daughter is at High Point University studying to be an educator. So pretty much have everything covered. And that's the farm there. This is some of what I have done over the past, and I hope you can see it. I ignored Jane's her email that said make things big. So a couple of the ones I've highlighted in black: American Farmland Trust. Is anybody here from American Farmland Trust? No, I encourage you to get on their website. American Farmland Trust is a national organization. They deal with conservation. We were chosen in 2024 to be a case study for them. And what they do is they look at your farm, they look at the soil health values, the conservation values, and then they determine how you're doing as far as conservation. And they present that, they publicize that case study. There's a bunch that's been done in Pennsylvania, out towards California. So I encourage you to get on and look at that. I do a lot with precision agriculture and cover crops. I'm a soil health advocate. Everything we do on the farm is soil health based. This farmer scientist here, I believe things happen for a reason. I believe things don't happen for a reason. I was on a farmer panel for 3 years out of the University of Florida, and I got on their mailing list, and this guy sent an email out, and it was the email that said NRCS CIG grant. They were doing a grant on some farmers in North Carolina, and there were six farmers. Well, when I opened the email, it was the wrong attachment, but I started looking at the attachment, and it was a gentleman, David Brandt, out in Ohio. And that's David Brandt. I've gotten to understand a lot of what he's done. He's a soil health champion. But what this CIG grant said, what these farmers in North Carolina were farmer scientists. They love to work with cover crops. They love to work with soil health, water quality. And so I think a lot of us in Virginia, I'm part of a group, Innovative Roundtable, and we're 12 farmers or so across the state of Virginia, and we're soil health based. And so all of us, I think, are farmer scientists. And this one here speaks to, when we talk about climate change, I think personally, I'm talking from the farm's aspect. When we talk about climate change, a farmer thinks about solar panels and electric cars, but I don't think that if you talk about changing of the climates, that's real to a farmer. And it's those two words. We are fighting situations now on the farm where we're going for 5 weeks with no water, and then we get 5 inches of rain the next weekend. And so becoming economic and climate tolerant, I think, is part of what I'm striving to do on the farm. And it's through soil health measures. Part of what I was asked to do was to talk about Colonial's on the ground VACS local programs. Marissa, again, did a great job of overview of what the VACS program is. And that's what we do at Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District. We do the whole farm approach this year is I've been involved in the whole farm approach for some time with DCR. It's new to us at Colonial. What I think I wanted to do today was to talk about where we think we're going to be at Colonial in the years, what we have up and coming, as it pertains to our farmers and as it pertains to me on our farm. I think there's a lot of talk about pay for performance in the legislation. I know it's been out there. It's been talked about for a while, and I'll give credit where credit is due. I was the chair of the cover crop nutrient management subcommittee for the TAC for the state of Virginia, and Jim Tate was on our board, on our subcommittee. And Jim Tate worked for Hanover Caroline Soil and Water District for many, many years. And he started talking about pay for performance. So talking about outcome-based incentives. On the farm, I'm always striving for those higher yielding cover crops because of nutrient cycling, because of soil health values. So when I got to Colonial, and I'll talk about how that all came about in a few minutes, we started looking at, again, identifying pay for performance. Can we move to an outcome-based system? Precision verified. So I know DEQ is looking at phosphorus, the charts that Marissa showed. We think at Colonial, we think we can do a no application system of phosphorus. I've got no fertilizer right now on any of my fields this year on corn or soybeans. I have half my rate of nitrogen that I would normally put on our corn, and all of it's coming from cover crops. It's coming from nutrient cycling. So I think we can do away with all of the fertilizers, not some of the fertilizers based off of soil testing and what have you. And I think that's what we need to begin to look at. The model. I wonder if we can make a more accurate model by what I'm getting ready to show you. Carbon. I think carbon is one of the biggest things that we're going to start talking about. And I think we actually need to start talking about that. Summer cover crop. I've got I have 2 fields in right now that have a summer cover crop in, and I hope that I can grow my fertilizer per se for next year's corn crop and not put anything on it. So that's my goal, just to see if I can do it. This slide right here, if you don't take any of the slides away, this slide right here is what's driving my system. These are 2 rye fields. Rye in the VACS program is the most planted because we say it takes up the most amount of nitrogen in the model. That one right there, it gets $90 an acre. We did biomass testing on them on 5-acre grids, and I'll get into that in a minute. The one on the right is about 3 tons of rye. So that one was terminated. The date by which you can terminate cover crops is the 1st of March. That one was terminated on day 1. In fact, that farmer right there sprayed it. That was going into soybeans, had to respray it because the weeds grew. Got $90 an acre for his rye cover crop. One on the right was 3 tons, sprayed it once, but he also got $90 an acre. Okay. It just makes me wonder. Okay. The carbon values, you can see the carbon values. We sent off samples. The nitrogen value was 36 pounds in that one. It was 100 pounds in this one. Carbon value was 840. It was 2,500 a ton on this side. This right here is driving, in my mind, this pay for performance scenario. These are not my fields. I'll show you my fields in a minute. So in Alabama, Kip Balkan is with ARS down there. They did some cover crop studies. We have specs with the state of Virginia that we're required to plant so much bushels per acre to meet the specs. We're required to plant early to get bonuses. We're required rye bonuses, et cetera, et cetera. University, ARS in Alabama looked at a 6-year study. Planting dates, earlier planting dates equate to higher biomass. That's what we do now, but that's what they did find that, yes, the earlier that you plant the cover crops, the more biomass that you get, the more water quality benefits you get from that cover crop. Seeding rates. They looked at, we have 2 bushels per acre. They looked at seeding rates. On rye, they found that seeding rates did not impact the biomass. It was the planting dates had more impact. They looked at 60 pounds versus 90 pounds of these grasses. They even, in fact, in the article said they could go down to 45 pounds because it's allowing in the spring, it's allowing planting earlier, getting that system established, allowing it to grow in the spring. That's how they're getting that biomass, and that's how they're getting that water quality. I'll speak at the end. We had the privilege of meeting with Dr. Hobley at USGS a couple weeks ago. We've met with NASA Langley about all of this. Dr. Hobley is working in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Missouri. I think he's out in the Mississippi Delta. And what they're indicating is that a cover crop planted late, terminated early, it's not the water quality benefits that I think we need to have. So if we move to a incentive, outcome-based bonus program, if you will, of paying for performance, it would incentivize folks by nature to plant early, which is what we want. Nitrogen applications, I do this. I put some nitrogen in March on my cover crops because I want more biomass. I want the most biomass of those cover crops that I can get because that equates to nutrient cycling, weed suppression, the whole 9 yards. So it depends on late planted cover crops. It has not a lot of effect, but on early planted, when it grows off in the spring, it has a lot of effect. This is beginning to where we started at Colonial. What do I have to 9:45 or 10:45? Okay. So to give you a little bit of background, I came to Colonial in February of this year. In the summer of 2023, these are my fields right here. These are vetch fields. It's one field, but it had vetch in it in 2023, in the fall of 2023. I started talking to my supplier, and what we do is we plant vetch in the fall on our farm. We go in the spring, we roll it with a roller, and then we plant green into that vetch, and that's our nitrogen source. The way I would test, I do all kinds of testing on the farm. The way that I look at how much, so I'm always asking how much nitrogen am I getting out of this vetch? How much can I credit to my next corn crop? Well, a very sophisticated method that I have been using over the past 3 years is I made a 1 foot square PVC Frisbee, and you go out and you sling it. And wherever it lands, you cut that out, that 1 foot square out, and then you take that, you dry it, and you weigh it. You get a tonnage per acre. I know my values from forage analysis on my vetch of percent nitrogen, and then I can figure out how much is available. So there's got to be a better way than me throwing a Frisbee to figure out how much nitrogen is available. So I started talking with Southern States guys, and I said, is there some way you can vary the rate of nitrogen based off my biomass maps? Because not all biomass is the same across the field, especially when we talk about cover crops. And after some time, he said, we're going to send you to a company in the Midwest, a satellite company, because I'd asked him, can I do this via satellites? Can I have satellites take pictures of my cover crop and equate that to biomass? He sent us to a company in the Midwest. We began to work with that company. That was in the fall. And in the spring, I went to work at Colonial, and Jim Wallace is the programs manager down there. Amy Walker is the operations manager. And I started talking with Jim about this concept. And that's how this whole pay for performance at Colonial, I think, began. So we went to the board and we said, we have this concept. We want to look at pay for performance. We want to look at a proof of concept. Can we use satellite imagery to determine how much biomass is in a field, whether it's vetch, whether it's rye, whether it's oats, and maybe move towards paying for those outcome-based cover crops for water quality and for nitrogen. So what we did was, this is it's a 40-acre field on the left. The green is higher biomass vetch. The reds, of course, are lower biomass. This company, we went out, we determined the points. So we got on 5-acre points. We went out and sampled. We also pulled high, medium, and low samples based off of what we determined on these maps. And you can see over here the biomass that was equated with each of those points, high, medium, and low. But this is how it started, proof of concept, using satellite imagery to determine if we can, in fact, vary the rate of nitrogen. From that proof of concept, and this is where we think that Colonial wants to go on a local level, Soil and Water Conservation District on a local level in the future. This is that field I was showing you this was just prior to termination. This is the rye that I took a picture of in the first picture. And you can still see the corn stalk sticking up. That was just prior to termination. We did 16 samples in that field. The imagery came in. 4 of the samples were above a ton. 2 samples were at 1.5 and 10 samples were less than a ton. This is my field. I'm very proud of this field. These are oats. So that average biomass, the one that was prior was 1.3 tons to the acre. This is over 3 tons of oats. We did the same exact thing. We broke these out into 5-acre grids. We looked at the satellite imagery, and then we equated those. We dried every sample. We dried every sample, and then equated them to the points. I had an average of 3 tons, 100 pounds of nitrogen value in that, and the carbon was 2,500 pounds. Carbon in this one was 1,100 pounds and the nitrogen was 47. So if we think about what those plants are taking up from a nitrogen standpoint, these are the comparisons. I had 4 samples that were less than or a ton or so. The other field had 10. I even had one that was pushing 6 tons of biomass. Which is a lot of carbon, it's a lot of nitrogen, it's a lot of weed suppression, it's a lot of nutrient cycling. One thing that we learned in this whole study is that different cover crops produce different results in the light spectrum. So when we were trying to look at satellite imagery, this is comparing, this is not from field to field, the colors, it is in that field, and the red is in comparison to the greens in that field. So it's not a specific value, it's how is it comparing in that field. Well, this down here, this red down here, you can see it had 2 tons of biomass, but up here also in some green spots had 2 tons, but it's green. So why is this red? Well, what happened was down here, I like to experiment, and I put in a good bit of radish, mustard, kale. I don't even know what else was in there. It was down here in this corner that has a different light value than oats than in the rest of the field. So what we learned was we have to do in the future, if we move forward with a scenario where we're doing pay for performance, we're going to have to train the satellites, train lights to understand the different cover crops and what their values are. That's one thing we pulled out of this. So outcome-based scenarios, pay for performance. Again, we had a great conversation. We went to NASA Langley with what we're doing, talked to their engineers. We then met with Allison Thiem and Dr. Hively with USGS. And we told them what we are doing. And Dr. Hobley gave us a bunch of good information. I hope that there's collaboration in the future with Dr. Hobley. What they've done, they're looking at more so in Maryland. They're helping the system in Maryland, their VACS program system, by planting dates. Has it been planted? Has it been established? Is it terminated? What have you? We told him what we are interested in doing and looking at biomass. The problem that Dr. Hobley told us that we didn't understand is that biomass and the light spectrum, I think of it as a funnel. So if you have a funnel, at the bottom of the funnel is where there's when the cover crop is small, the confidence level is high, and that's where that small cover crop is. So the confidence level that it is, in fact, a half a ton or a ton, that confidence level is higher at the lower end of that funnel. As the cover crop grows and that funnel expands, when the cover crop gets taller, fills in, so when we reach 2-3 tons, the confidence level drops. So I think that's what we in the future will have to begin to work on. And he kind of indicated, and this is some of what we have maybe figured out, that if we do, and I'll call it bonuses for biomass. So I'm not at all suggesting that we should replace the existing VACS program we have, but I think we should add to it. I'll call it VACS 2.0. I think we should go in the future that we have our VACS program. But if you are of the nature that legislators, us in water quality, that if we value higher biomass because of nitrogen uptake, nutrient cycling, carbon, then we need to maybe start incentivizing the higher biomass in the future. In talking to Dr. Hobley, we came up with, we're paying $90 an acre right now for rye. And I'm not suggesting this is what it should be. This is just for what ifs. So what if we were to adjust what we're doing? So what if we were to say, we have to have a 60% cover determination? So what if we were to pay, and that's for water quality WIP goals. So what if the baseline was to be a ton? So a ton and below, I don't know, $45 an acre. Okay. If you go and we would fly at that point, and we would get values on March 1st, and that would be your baseline determination. If you in fact do have up to a ton, then you would get a value, a dollar amount. I don't know what that is. And then from that point forward, we start incorporating soil health and carbon values after that. So what if we go we start flying again on May 1st, and we get satellite imagery to show that this is what the biomass is on May 1st. And if you're between a ton and 3 tons, so between 2,000 and 6,000 pounds, then you get that additional $45, which would put you at 90, which is where we are now. Let's say you're at 7,000 or 8,000 pounds. Should you not get even more from that? I don't know. This is just something we've been, and Dr. Hobley said, if you're doing it in sort of like this, and I'm not at all putting words to Dr. Hobley, this is what I interpreted from our conversations, the water quality benefits would come from the beginning, because in part, what I've come to understand is the later planted cover crops terminated early up in Maryland don't give as much water quality value as they would if it was early planted and late terminated. And so I'm not even sure they're paying up in Maryland. If somebody from Maryland is here, I'm not sure they're paying for that cover crop that's not of value. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure that's what we want to do. But it makes you think, should we start not start moving towards an outcome-based initiative? Part of in this proof of concept that we did this past year, part of what we learned was satellites. Now NASA has different satellites, but the satellites we were using came around every 7 to 10 days. So if it came around and it was like today, we didn't get a picture. And so it was another week out before we had the chance of getting a picture. So we've already talked to 2 drone companies, and they think that they can, in fact, as higher biomass, we start experimenting with higher biomass. They think they can shrink that funnel so that they, in fact, will be giving us true recommendations or biomass figures once the cover crops get taller. Part of what we didn't in using cover crop satellites for varying the rate of nitrogen, which I think still is viable in this system that DEQ or that DCR and DEQ are looking at, trying to reduce the amount of nitrogen that we use, the amount of phosphorus that we use, is the value, the percent value of nitrogen different vetch cover crops. Some of what we found this year, typically it's about 4%, but we did find some 6%, which is a huge nitrogen value increase that we didn't count on. We think this one right here, number 2, precision-based applications were either reduced or no application of phosphorus. And I'll even say no application of nitrogen. We think we can do that. So a 1-to-1 reduction model and credit model, it's my understanding that if we don't apply a pound of phosphorus in the model, we get a 1-to-1 credit for that. It's my understanding of that. We think we can get some pounds based off of what we want to do. This is my nutrient management plan. And from what I just said, I'll ask the question. My total phosphorus allowed application in my nutrient management plan, and I follow, I mean, I'm nutrient management based, was 7,800 pounds of phosphorus that I was allowed to apply in the spring of 2024. We applied nothing because of our cycling value in our cover crops. So I applied nothing. I have 7,840 pounds that was not applied. That's a 1-to-1 credit to the model. I'll ask, should I not get paid for that? In a pay for performance situation, if you're not applying phosphorus, not applying nitrogen, should we not get paid for that? I'm just asking the question, trying to get folks to start thinking. Same thing on nitrogen, 900 pounds, 13,900 pounds. The actual that I applied was 8,600. So I didn't apply 5,300, almost 5,400 pounds. And this is my last slide, and I'll just leave it again. That's from the original one, and that's $90 an acre. That was terminated on 3/15. You can see the average biomass. That's my field. Take a look at the dollar figure up front, because it's not rye, it's oats. I'm only getting $70 an acre. Doesn't make a difference to me because it's more valuable. That is more valuable to me than that. So that's where I'm headed. That's where we're headed. Pay for performance, we think, in Colonial. That is our silo. That's a tribute to my son that is halfway across the country. So, any questions?
The main difference between those, the first 2 rye fields that you showed, was that just the time of planting?
Time of termination. We think that more than likely, I know these 2 farmers, we have early termination or early planting dates according to the specs for this area, November 10th, right, Marissa? I think it's November 10th. Most of what we have planted is November 10th, by November 10th. The cover crop, yes, sorry. Cover crop is planted by November 10th. Terminating early, that was terminated probably 1st of March, when you're allowed to terminate it without any penalty. It's the 1st or 2nd week of March when you're allowed to terminate it. From that point forward, it's all been calculated. That one was still growing in the 1st of May. So termination date, allowing, and Maryland has done that. And I think that's where in part of the whole farm approach is we have an incentivized $10 an acre payment for not terminating before May 1st. And I know that Maryland has done the same thing, where they have an incentive for allowing that cover crop to grow until May 1st and not terminating before May 1st. So that's spring up on anything, whether it's oats, wheat, barley, rye, vetch, any of them. They begin to grow, as anything does. Flowers, they begin to grow in the spring and they green up in the spring. So more value comes in the spring. It's getting it in early to get something established these cover crops that protects soil erosion through the winter when it's most vulnerable. So, I mean, I'm of different nature. Some guys just, I think, in my opinion, it is the uncertainty of dealing with planting into something that's unfamiliar. Planting into the one on the left, there's not a lot there to plant into. It's easy to plant into. Nothing really is going to go wrong. Planting into that one can be disastrous if it wraps up. It will wrap up on the planter. It will create a situation where it's frustrating. There are, if you terminate the one on the right, you can earlier, a week or two before you plant, you can get into situations where you have pests that were in the cover crop because it's there. You'll have diseases or what have you. We at Brandon Farms have moved into a system to where we think the soils are becoming, I do biological testing on our soils. I don't put on fungicides. I don't put on insecticides unless I have to. This is the first year we've put on insecticides in over 5 years. We haven't limed in almost 8 years. It's because of the soil ecology. It's because the soil is taking care of itself and the soils are taking care of our crops. So I value the system, but it took us a while to get the equipment to where it should be in order to be able to plant into something like that. Slugs are a big problem around here. And that one on the left, you won't have as much of a slug problem because slugs don't, that moist environment under this one over here is more of an environment for those. But what they don't understand is that I've actually seen less slug pressure by letting it grow because slugs will feed, they're feeding on what's the biomass of that cover crop. If you terminate it and they're there early, they'll move into your corn crop or your soybean crop because they don't have anything to eat. But if you plant green, which we terminate planting green, we terminate the cover crop after it's been planted into, it gives you more value. The slugs actually, the insects actually stay feeding on that green cover crop until your soybean or corn crop has a chance to get up and grow. I see the value in the one on the left from not only those values, but nutrient cycling. We control. I have less than $10 an acre in chemicals on my corn crop, the entire corn crop right now, because I let the cover crop grow. So I'm in a different system.
Another question?
Have you thought about incentivizing like the method of termination? Like, is there anything that could be done with that? Like, I'm not a farmer. I don't really know what's involved in terminating the crop, but you were talking about planting right into the green. So I don't know if that would cause like less loss of nutrients between the time of planting. Like, what are is there any nutrient benefits in planting in the still growing cover crop?
There's tremendous value in planting green, and because when you terminate early, you can see the value, you can see the tonnage that's there, right? So where we have a ton that was terminated early versus 3 tons that was planted into late. So it's the termination date that has more effect. What I will say, to speak to your point, the values in phosphorus and potassium that are cycled are based off of that tons. So vetch, for instance, I've done forage analysis on our vetch, where we have a ton per ton, we're getting about 20 pounds of phosphorus, available phosphorus, and we're getting almost 80 or 90 pounds of potassium. So in the first year we grew vetch, we had over 3 tons. So essentially, to speak to your point, I had 60 pounds of available phosphorus for that next corn crop. And I had almost 300 pounds of potassium, to the point where I had so much potassium being released out of the vetch that when I sent off my sample of my corn, my tissue sample, it came back. You need to watch. You have excessive amounts of potassium. Well, it's nothing I can do about it, but that's the value that comes out. There's been a lot of study by Virginia Tech. They're doing the research. They're actually suggesting that, and they're beginning to look at potassium in these cover crops, because potassium is so soluble. It comes out of these cover crops really fast. And they're saying that there's just as much value in potassium. So the longer you let it grow, more potassium, the more tonnage you have, more nutrients that you cycle. I actually give a presentation, and I have pictures of Dr. Mark Ryder in a soil pit. We dug a soil pit, and I did soil tests down to 3 feet deep for that picture. I have root systems of cover crops in March that are below 3 feet deep, and the levels of potassium below 3 feet were in the medium level. It was medium all the way down because we have sandy soils. So what's happening is those root systems are at below 3 feet. The cover crop is about 6 inches tall in March. So what happens as we get into April and May, the above ground biomass begins to grow. Well, it's pulling all of those nutrients from 3 feet deep and putting it into that above ground biomass. So we're cycling nutrients based off. Yes, exactly right.
All right, thank you so much. That's unfortunately all the time we have for questions this morning, but feel free to continue the discussion during our break. All right, thank you so much. All right, so we now are going to take a little bit of a break, about 15 minutes or so, and we will meet back here at 11 a.m. Please take a moment to network with each other, talk with our sponsors and exhibitors today, and grab some food over at the refreshments. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Our next speaker is Amy Ullan. Amy serves as the board president and street monitoring program coordinator with Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. She has led the street monitoring program since 2019. In that time, the number of benthic macroinvertebrate sites has increased from 5 to 26. She launched a year-round salt watch program at 50 sites, now in its 4th year, by working in partnership with the Isaac Walton League of America. She's also established a chemical monitoring program at 6 sites, now in its 2nd year, in partnership with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. Amy is a Virginia Save Our Streams certified monitor and trainer, having trained over 20 new monitors. Under her leadership, Loudoun Wildlife's street monitoring program received the Loudoun County 2023 Environmental Excellence Award. She also led a $41,000 Google grant project to improve water quality in the village of Luckett's, Virginia, which resulted in an EPA mandate for new wastewater treatment facility and significant economic relief for 17 underserved families to receive water filters and descalers. So welcome, Amy.
Hey, everybody. So if you haven't heard of Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy, we're a relatively small nonprofit. Oh, sorry. We're a relatively small nonprofit. We're a membership-funded, volunteer-driven nonprofit up in Northern Virginia, and we're dedicated to preserving, protecting, and restoring wildlife habitat, and we do that through a variety of programs. We have a bunch of citizen science initiatives, habitat conservation programs, educational programming. We do conservation advocacy, and we also have an 89-acre wildlife sanctuary outside of Luckett's, Virginia, which is going to come into play in the second half of my talk. So one of those citizen science programs is our stream monitoring program, and we have 5 main areas. So as I go through this this presentation, I'm gonna go through each one and kind of tell you what we do and then the impact of that program. So we do benthic macroinvertebrate surveys, we have a salt watch program, we have a chemical monitoring program, we do educational outreach programming, and we do data-driven advocacy. We've been doing some kind of monitoring of some type since 1995. And so far this year, we've had 110 volunteers who have contributed over 1,900 hours to our program, and that's before our fall data season really kicks off. And we have a lot of community partners that we work with that make all of our work possible. So first, I'm going to talk about our benthic macroinvertebrate surveys. We do them in conjunction with Virginia Save Our Streams program. And we basically go out in the spring and the fall and look for the little critters that live at the bottom of the stream, which tell us how healthy the stream is. And we now actually have 28 sites. We have 28 certified monitors, and all of our surveys are led by certified monitors, but we really encourage non-certified volunteers to participate. That's some of the best ways to get new certified monitors. And last year, we were the second highest contributing county in the state for Virginia Save Our Streams data submissions. And out of the 45 entries from Loudoun, 38 of those came from Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. So our data gets used on a variety of different levels. At the very local level, we publish all of our data on individual site pages on our website. We also do write-ups in the newsletter that I put out and put on our webpage. Our data then goes to Virginia Save Our Streams, which eventually also ends up on the Clean Water Hub and goes to DEQ and eventually ends up on the Chesapeake Monitoring Cooperative dataset. And the impact of our surveys, we're really assessing local water quality around the county and tracking changes over time. We have a lot of sites that have a lot of historical data, so we can see changes over time. We're looking for areas of concern. They may be used for deciding where we're going to do future chemical monitoring. They can be used to determine which streams we're going to nominate to DEQ for further study. As I mentioned, we share our data at a lot of different levels, and we really engage volunteers, including students, in hands-on environmental science, and we're increasing the environmental awareness of our community about stream issues. So we also have a salt watch program that we do in conjunction with the Isaac Walton League of America Salt Watch program. And that little container there holds one of the test strips that we do. And our program is a little different in that we ask all of our volunteers to fill out a Google form. So they're also being eyes and ears for our streams, alerting us to any problems, telling us where there's trash. And then we're able to keep all that data so that we can use that with various local agencies. And then so we have a whole bunch of sites now. We started back in 2021 in season 1. We had 14 sites and 9 volunteers, and we were collecting winter weather data. We thought we were awesome. And now we're even more awesome because we're going into season 4. We have 45 sites, 50 volunteers. We're collecting semi-monthly data and winter weather data. And I'm getting ready to have another kickoff program in October, so I hope we'll have even more volunteers then. So far this year, we have over 560 data points, which is 14% of the nationwide data set. And since we started the program, we have almost 1,500 data points. And that was our team from a recent meeting that we had at the end of the season. And once again, our data goes to a bunch of different places. We share it with our salt watchers and in our newsletter. We use it for advocacy and educational outreach efforts. It also gets uploaded into the Clean Water Hub, where you can see each individual site and its history. And that gets picked up by the Isaac Walton League of America Salt Watch map. And so we've also been using the data for social media and in my newsletter outreach. So we've been doing things like stealing the Isaac Walton League's wonderful graphics to talk about how to be a smart salter. And we've also been advocating for getting salt piles on the roads picked up after storms. A lot of people just don't know that that's even a possibility. And we're also talking about our data. This was a toxic site during the winter, and just making people people aware that this is happening in their own backyard and why it's important. It also went outside of the winter season. This was some salt in a parking lot that had just been left uncovered. So we contacted the county and they were really great to work with. They got it covered with the property owner. Over time, of course, that started to deteriorate. So we contacted them again and they got it removed. So these things are making a difference. The impact of our program, we've identified 15 hotspots for salt pollution in the Leesburg area on 5 different streams. We also, as I showed you, got 2 enormous salt piles removed. Some of my volunteers were really excited about sweeping up salt. So now they have 120 pounds of salt sitting in 5-gallon drums in their garage. And that has led us to start working on a salt take back program. We've also engaged 65 volunteers, including a lot of high schoolers and families. We've increased awareness about the connection between salt and stream health and what actions individuals can take. So one of the really cool things was, this is a student that I mentored, Karen. She's part of the Youth Conservation Leadership Institute, and she did a whole project on salt watch in her neighborhood, and she presented it at the Loudoun Student Environmental Action Showcase. And I was at the same event on the other side of the building with a table with benthic macroinvertebrates. And a little kid came over and said, "Oh, these are the critters that the salt is killing." It's like, yes. So we also have a chemical monitoring program that we do in conjunction with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay with their River Trends program. And we've been doing this for a year. We started in September of last year. And we have 6 sites on 2 streams. So we're doing segment monitoring. All of these sites are benthic macroinvertebrate sites that had questionable or unacceptable ecological ratings. So we wanted to understand why, what was going on there. And the bugs could only tell us so much. So trained a team of volunteers. We now have 13 people in our team. 9 of them are certified. We do a whole bunch of parameters. We also clean up trash. And our data goes to a lot of different places. It goes to the CMC and DEQ. And for the salt watch and nitrate watch data, we also upload that to the Clean Water Hub. And I'm really excited that Sam and Isaac Walton are working with DEQ to get that eventually into the CMC. So the impact of our chemical monitoring program, we're really developing a more holistic understanding of stream health in the urban areas to target future advocacy and outreach. We're providing high quality data to DEQ, and also for our own use to figure out what streams we want to nominate to DEQ. We're engaging residents and students in environmental science so they can really see what's going on and why it matters. And we're also planning to use the data to create a stream health report card to also increase awareness. And we've also been cleaning up trash at our sites, and we partner with Keep Loud Beautiful. So the data that our volunteers submit to me through a Google form includes information about trash. And if there's a site that has a lot of trash that they can't clean up, tell Keep Loud Beautiful and use their volunteer database to go get that cleaned up. We also do a lot of outreach events. We've got a newsletter. We also have a monthly feature on Facebook and Instagram. This year it's Macro Marvels, so the superpower of different macroinvertebrates. A lot of people don't even know that these guys exist, so we're just raising awareness. This was that macroinvertebrate exploration table I was telling you about, which really gets kids engaged. And we also founded the Loudoun Watershed Roundtable, which is a group of nonprofit and government folks working together. We decided that our goal is going to be a social media campaign to really explain to people about the importance of stream health and steps that they could take to improve it. And since 2021, our programming has reached over 1,300 people around the county. We've got 240 newsletter subscribers. We've certified 7 high school monitors and mentored 5 YCLI students with stream monitoring projects. And we've also established a social media campaign with Loudoun Watershed Watch in conjunction with the county government. So this brings me to the biggest project that we've done is a grant project called Securing Clean Drinking Water for Luckets. And before I go into all the project, I kind of want to orient you to where this project is taking place. So Loudoun County's up there at the top of Virginia in red. In Loudoun County, up where that red arrow is the little village of Luckett's. And outside of Luckett's, this is Luckett's right here. This whole area that's outlined in black is Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy's J.K. Black Oak Wildlife Sanctuary. It's 89 acres. It has a lot of diverse and important habitat there. And one of the projects that we're doing is in conjunction with the Nature Conservancy. We're working to convert this area right here into wetlands. And to be able to do that, there's a lot of invasive species on this property, so we would have to unfortunately use herbicides to get rid of it. So there's a stream that runs right here, and the sanctuary manager came up to me in 2021 and said, "Do you think that we could survey this stream there and get some baseline data so that we can see if the herbicides are going to affect the stream?" I said, "Sure." So we set up an upstream site up here. This is an unnamed tributary of Limestone Branch, which empties into the Potomac. About a quarter of a mile down, we set up another site, and this is all the area that's going to be converted, so it's very close to the stream. And on the other side of our property, there's a mobile home park community. So in the spring of 2021, we started with our upstream site and did a benthic survey there. We were really excited. It got a 10 out of 12, an acceptable rating. There's a lot of diversity. We were thrilled. We went downstream, and it was a 5. It was unacceptable ecological conditions. The only thing that we really found there were a bunch of midges and some flatworms. This is one of our monitors, Jason, looking at the table really closely because there were so many midges that we had to count them on the table. So what in the world was going on in just less than a quarter of a mile between these two sites to contribute to this poor score and such a change? So we did a walk, and we started upstream, and we got about halfway down, and we found this, which didn't look like this in the spring because it was all overgrown. This is a wastewater treatment facility for the mobile home community. And the red arrow is pointing to the discharge pipe, which is going directly into the unnamed tributary. And the permit limit for that facility is 126 CFUs. And in July of 2021, we reached out to the Friends of Shenandoah River, and E. coli that was coming out of there was almost 25,000 CFUs. So we knew that we had a problem. We reached out to DEQ and we shared this information with them. We found out that this facility had actually previously been under investigation by the EPA. And this sort of started the process again. It reminded them that this was an issue. But that was going to take a long time, and we wanted to make sure that the process was going to continue. So in October, we applied for a grant from the Google Data Centers Fund, and we received funding in January. So we started our project that basically had 3 components. One was water quality testing of 2 Luckett streams, some wastewater effluent and drinking water. The drinking water is important because this area is an area of karst topography. So the surface water is directly related to the groundwater quality. There's a lot of sinkholes, so the water can go directly into the groundwater without getting filtered. So this was not only an environmental problem, but a human health problem. We also wanted to provide resources to the community to help them improve their drinking water quality and conduct educational outreach about water quality issues. So I'm going to go over each of the 3 areas for what we did. For the water quality testing, we did E. coli testing, benthic macroinvertebrate surveys, and we did drinking water testing. For the E. coli testing, I know this is hard to see, but it's just to really give you an idea. All the little red areas are stream sites, and yellowish orange ones are the 2 wastewater treatment discharge pipes. So there's really 2 streams going on. Up here, there's Clerk's Run, and then this is the unnamed tributary to Limestone Branch. So we had 6 sites, 2 on Clerk's Run and 4 on the unnamed tributary, and 2 wastewater treatment discharge pipes. We conducted 29 samples from all 6 of those stream sites and the 2 wastewater treatment sites from February to December of 2022. And all the samples were analyzed at an accredited lab. So the stream results for the E. coli testing, 70% of them all exceeded the single sample recreational use threshold of 235 CFUs. I'm going to show you some data in just a second, but all the concentrations peaked after rainfall. Obviously, everything is getting washed out. This is a very rural area. So we had failing wastewater treatment facilities, failing residential septics going on, livestock, and then of course, wildlife. I know you're not going to be able to see this data, but the important thing is the upper limit is 9,000 CFUs and up here, and all of those peaks were happening after rain. The one right here, that was high because that was also downstream from the wastewater treatment facility. But the upper limit here is 9,000 CFUs. For the wastewater treatment facility, the one that we initially discovered, over 50% of the samples exceeded the permit limit and sometimes up to almost 2,000 times the limit. The other wastewater treatment facility wasn't so bad. Only 10% of the samples exceeded the limit. And all of these exceedances were reported. This is a sample from the wastewater treatment facility on the unnamed tributary. You can see how cloudy and disgusting it is. And here's the data. So the upper limit here is 25,000 CFUs, and this one went off the chart over there. So, and what you can't see is that there's also a lot of exceedances that are all around the red line of the permit limit. And this was a really fun part. During the summer, when I was collecting samples, there were actually sewage solids in the sample and accumulating in the stream bottom. So it was pretty disgusting. We also reported this to DEQ. We also did benthic surveys at 3 sites. The interesting thing here is that the site that was downstream of the wastewater treatment facility actually got a lower score in the fall, probably not so much from the E. coli, but from all those accumulated sewage solids that were just covering the stream bottom and smothering the life there. Downstream, all the way downstream at the end, that site actually got really great scores, despite the fact that it had some fluctuations up to 9,000 CFUs of E. coli from cows that were upstream. So we also did a bunch of drinking water testing from underserved communities and private wells. And the private wells, 4 of 6 out of the homes actually had problems. It was a big surprise to them. We provided them with treatment options for them to take care of the issues. For the community wells, there were 2 mobile home parks with underserved people there. And they all had beliefs that the water wasn't safe to drink. When we initially did outreach efforts with them, they were convinced that the water was dirty. They were going to the food bank to buy food, and they were going to Costco to buy water. They were spending up to $3,600 a year to get water. And when we did the testing, we were expecting to find E. coli, but all of their water passed all of the drinking requirements, although they did have hard water. However, none of them were planning to drink the water. They said they were still going to buy bottled water. So we had all these funds we were going to use to buy UV filters, and instead we got these little water descalers and these high quality water filtration systems. And they all joked and said that now Costco was going to go out of business because they weren't buying water there anymore. We also had a community town hall that 45 people attended to raise awareness of the issues. And the impact of this project, just last week, found out that they did put in a new facility. They mandated 2.5 years ago that they had to put in a new facility, and they did on the 17th last week. And they had their certificate to operate, which was really exciting. We received these families over about $2,500,000 for 4 years, and we're looking for more funding to get them more filters to continue that. We've shared our data with Loudoun Soil and Water, and they've got some exclusion fencing going up to keep livestock out from the one site. And we've also increased community awareness. This is the site in the construction. And so we've really been transforming our data into tangible change through all of these things that I've been talking about. And we couldn't do this without our partners. So I just wanted to thank the guys at Walton League of America, Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, Virginia DEQ, Loudoun Soil and Water, Friends of the Shenandoah River, and our amazing volunteers. So thank you guys so much.
Thank
Thank you, Amy. Are there any questions from the audience?
Hi, I was wondering about the volunteers certified to collect and identify macroinvertebrates, and the training involved in that was designed by you all specifically, or is there any sort of like parameters dictated by the DEQ as far as materials and like the time they go into that?
Sure, that's all the Virginia Save Our Streams Rocky Bottom Protocol. So they have a very specific protocol, and I'm trained to teach our volunteers how to do that. And then they have a written test, a macro test, and a field exam.
Any other questions out there?
Hi, Amy. Great presentation. I was curious involving the volunteers in a site where you know there's potential like human hazards in the water. So what protections did you all take as you were monitoring? Yeah, so definitely got the lowdown about all the dangers of E. coli. Don't touch any body parts. We were all wearing gloves. And had like a little hazard bag that we put everything in. After continue to get some of this data, we actually suspended some of the benthic surveys after that. In fact, we're not doing it this season because the water levels were low and we know there's still solids there. But we definitely did take precautions and gave all of our volunteers the option. We informed them completely. So.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Amy. Welcome back to the 2024 Virginia Water Monitoring Council Conference. I'm Sam Puckett, and I work with the Isaac Walton League of America based out of Gaithersburg, Maryland. I am also the vice chair of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council Steering Committee, and I will be the moderator for this afternoon's session. Just as a reminder, this morning we heard from Marissa Roland with DCR. She talked about agricultural BMPs and the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share Program. Robert Waring with the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District provided a local perspective of agricultural BMP programs. Amy Ullan described the work of the stream monitoring program by Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy, and Clay Britton talked about harmful algal blooms in the Smith Mountain Lake region. This afternoon, we're going to continue talking about harmful algal blooms, but this time we'll focus on Lake Anna. Like this morning, we will be recording the afternoon presentations and we'll post them to our YouTube channel if we have the presenter's permission to do so. We'll finish by 4 p.m. and we'll hand out certificates of attendance at the end of the day. So at this time, just a reminder, silence your cell phones if you have not already. And if you do need to take a call, please step outside so we avoid disturbing others while listening to presentations. At this time, I'm pleased to introduce Harry Looney with the Lake Anna Civic Association. The Lake Anna Civic Association established a citizen monitoring program in 2002. Harry has volunteered as a water quality citizen monitor for the organization since 2019. He is currently the co-chair of the group's water quality committee. Harry also manages the association's cyanobacteria monitoring and macroinvertebrate monitoring projects. This year, Harry was appointed by the Louisa County Board of Supervisors to the Lake Anna Advisory Committee. He serves as a citizen representative to the committee and as the chair of the Environmental and Water Quality Subcommittee. Harry executes the Hydrilla Management Program and the Lake Anna Cyanobacteria Mitigation and Remediation Program, which you will hear more about in this presentation. Welcome, Harry.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm first one after lunch. See if I can keep everybody awake. I'll try not to be too boring and too monotone. So we're going to talk about collaborative strategies ongoing, have been ongoing in the Lake Anna watershed for some time now. But this talk is specifically about harmful algal blooms. But I will give you some background for those of you that are not familiar with LACA or Lake General. So, all right. So Lake Anna, about half the size of Smith Mountain Lake, if you take both sides. So when I say both sides, so when locals talk about the lake, they talk about a public side, which is this area right here, which is 9,600 acres, and a private side, or officially the waste heat treatment facility for Dominion Energy's 2 nuclear reactors, which sit about right there. That's all private. That's about 3,400 acres, so 13,000 acre total. 200 miles of shoreline. We confuse everybody by talking about, like I said, the private side versus the public side, or the cold side versus the hot side. And officially, this is a reservoir, Lake Anna Reservoir, and the waste heat treatment. Now, who's LACA? So the Lake Anna Civic Association has been around since 1992. And in 2002, we started our water quality program. But we're just one committee. Dick Hanscom, sitting back here about in the middle section, and I co-chair the water quality committee, and we share project responsibilities that I'll talk a little bit about here in just a second. But there are a number of committees. We have an environmental preservation committee that we work very closely with, and they're the folks that are actually out there on the ground doing things like planting aquatic vegetation along the shoreline with homeowners, or working with people in the watershed to establish riparian buffers or reestablish riparian buffers. And we've got some grants that I'll talk about that help us do that. Our Emergency Services and Safety Committee is a very active committee. They've established the Lake Anna Rescue Group along with first responders in the area, and work very hard to ensure that the lake is a safe place for people to conduct their recreational activities. And you can see the other the one I don't really like is the Fireworks Committee. LAC has been doing that for some time. They shoot off fireworks on the Saturday closest to the 4th of July from one of the dikes that separates the cold side from the hot side. Everybody loves it, but for an environmentally focused organization, I'm not sure it's the best, but nobody seems to want to pick it up. It's all done by donations. I keep telling people a business could pick it up, or a business group could pick it up, sell t-shirts, sell things off of boats going around, whatever, but nobody seems to want to do it. So LACA continues to do it. All right. That's our mission. Pretty straightforward. Dick and I work on all of those things: education, advocacy, and community involvement. We're continuously looking for new volunteers to support our programs, looking for ways to enhance our text when we're putting grants together, by talking about how we fit into a much larger community. We are part of the York River Basin, and I was telling somebody earlier, what our experience is, if we talk about Lake Anna in a grant request to the Virginia Environmental Endowment or the Campbell Foundation, we don't get very far. If we talk about being the upper part of the York River Basin, I think they listen more. And so that's the way that we focus. But we make up a large part of the upper part of the York River Basin. Okay, so what does the Water Quality Committee do? We kind of shortened. At one point we had like 7 or 8 little projects. Now we're down to just these 4, and these 4 are the ones that take up most of Dick and my time and most of our money. The Legacy Water Quality Monitoring Project that started back in 2002 is our bread and butter. I've got over 75 volunteers that help us do that. We monitor, this year we're monitoring 25 lake locations and 5 stream locations, and we monitor the lake 4 times a year. We set up our monitoring plan. We do get a DEQ grant to help us fund this program. and along with the counties, 2 of the counties provide us funding as well. But we develop our monitoring plan with Jeff Talbot, who, oh, Jeff's still here or not? Oh, yeah, he's sitting there in the back with DEQ to make sure that we don't have any duplication. We do have one site that we duplicate on, but that's for a quality assurance purpose. And when DEQ needs to change their sites around, we change our sites around so that we are not duplicating effort as DEQ is monitoring Lake monthly, and we're monitoring out every other month during the recreational season. I'll talk more about this program through in the rest of the slides. You've heard about the macroinvertebrate program that Smith Mountain Lake and others are doing, Loudoun County. We're active in that as well. We don't have as many sites. It's kind of a newer project, and we're trying to grow the team. But we do this, it's part of our community engagement activity as well. One of our sites is managed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the state park at Lake Anna. We utilize their vehicles to get to the site. They actually go, the rangers go out with us. And then one of our other sites is with the Envirothon team at Louisa County High School. Great program, and we're looking forward to continuing that well into the future. And then of course, all this data and monitoring we're doing is no good if you're not doing anything with the data. And so we have a pretty robust data analysis ongoing year round. And we also support a lot of academic research. A lot of it's going on right now because of a state funded study that I'll tell you about in a couple of slides. But at times over the last 3 or 4 years, we've worked with each of these universities or institutions. We're currently working with pretty much all of them. We don't have a current project with Randolph-Macon. I did have 2 interns from Randolph-Macon this summer. And so we continue to explore those relationships and keep them active with each of the professors that we have direct contact with. Okay, so we're here to talk about HABs, and I don't expect that I don't want you to read that. Just look at the colors. Okay, the color tells you everything. So the way this table is broken down is this is 2018, this is 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, 24. And then the sites in the upper part of the lake. If it's got a colored in box, there was a HAB advisory. And this is about the upper 4,400 acres of the what I call the public side or the cold side of the lake. So that 9,600 acres, about 4,400 acres go under advisory at throughout most of the recreational season. Our primary, the data that we got from DEQ sampling, that those samples go to Old Dominion University under contract to the Virginia Department of Health, tells us that our primary species of cyanobacteria are within this order, the Nosticales. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. I'm not an environmental scientist, by the way, but I am a volunteer and I'm a system engineer, and I think the problem is more a system engineering problem than anything, because it's not totally an environmental science problem. It's not a chemistry problem. It's not a biology. It's a combination of all of those things, and you need somebody working across all of those engineering and scientific disciplines to kind of come up with an answer. So I think I do fit it from that standpoint. We do have, back in 2018, you can see these 2 boxes right here, and this was actually in the lower lake. I think Cliff mentioned earlier the VDH threshold is 100,000 cells per milliliter, 11.8 million cells per milliliter in that location of Microcystis aeruginosa. We don't have a microcystis problem though. Kind of fooled us because we're thinking all along as we're gearing up this program, that's what we expect to see. But that's not what we see a lot of. We see a lot of Raphidiopsis. If you total up all the cell counts over since 2018, you're getting probably 3 times as much Raphidiopsis as you are anything else. Earlier in the season, each recreational season, we'll see some Dolichospermum, some Aphanizomenon, but for the most part, once the temperature reaches 25 degrees C, until you get that peak and the water temperature starts coming back down, it's almost all Raphidiopsis up in the upper lake. And I'm actually seeing Raphidiopsis in the lower lake now as well. This is the key date. So just because of resources and because of the way the protocol works, if an advisory goes into place, it takes 2 consecutive samplings from DEQ below the threshold to lift the advisory. and those samples have to be 10 days apart. But DEQ samples the lake once a month. So if you once you go under advisory, you're there for at least 60 days. And most likely you're there for 90 days. And you can see that in those colors. Again, we have a microscope as well. We're part of the NOAA phytoplankton monitoring network as well, just like Smith Mountain Lake. We've been doing that for the past 2 years. We're able to identify these. The difference between what we do and what Old Dominion does, of course, is we don't cell count. We just identify. We've been trained to identify the top 5 species, and we report that through their database, online data. The good news is none of our advisories over those 6 years has been due to toxins. We've never exceeded a level of concern or a threshold or any of the 4 toxins that VDH tracks. They've always been based on cell counts. And you can, if you could see those numbers in that chart, you can see that, you know, it's normally 300, 400, 500,000 cells when something goes under advisory. All right, so what is the state doing about this? And I will admit that we look at it kind of with a Lake Anna focus on, but we realize this is not just a Lake Anna problem. The Smith Mountain Lake had advisories last year. We all know what's going on in the Shenandoah River as well. And so this is a Commonwealth problem, a state problem. And the state, at least from a Lake Anna perspective, has been responding with some funding. In FY22, they appropriated $3.5 million for a state-funded study, and I'll talk about that a little bit more on another slide. In the 24 budget, we pushed hard, both the Lake Anna Civic Association did and the counties pushed on our delegates and senators to get some money to actually do something about the problem. And they appropriated $1 million in FY24, which is being executed right now. And in FY25, the current budget year, they allocated or appropriated another $500,000, which we'll start using in 2025 in a program that I'll talk about in just a few minutes. So this is the DEQ state-funded study. And I took this data from a briefing that the DEQ program managers provided to our Lake Anna Civic Association annual meeting last year. We're currently in phase 1, getting close to the end of phase 1. Those kinds of activities are being done. Most of the data collection is being done by the United States Geological Survey. Talk to Brandon in the back. He's out on the lake. We got people taking him and his team out on quarterly synoptic visits and nearshore transit visits and things like that. We're having a great time learning about what they do. They've also put continuous monitoring stations in the lake and two of the main tributaries coming into the lake. It was a 2-year effort, and the goal is to develop data that will allow modeling and analysis to be conducted in the second phase, which will identify management strategies and practices that can be pursued in the future with appropriate funding to start taking our lake back, I guess, from the cyanobacteria. The study partners over here, I mentioned USGS, but of course, Department of Health is involved. The interstate, I haven't done too much coordination with ICERB, but I think the plan is from DEQ that they'll get involved. I know they're very active with the Shenandoah River part of the study, but I think they'll get more involved with the Lake Anna data in phase 2. And then Old Dominion University, of course, is reviewing all the data from a cyanobacteria standpoint. And they have a PhD grad student that's doing additional research work. And she comes out to the lake a couple of times a month, and we take her out to do sampling at those continuous monitoring sites. So that's what's going on with that $3.5 million. Now, about half of that went to the Lake Anna part of that study, and the other half is going on for what's being studied, same types of things in the Shenandoah River. I think they're focusing mainly on the north. Is that correct, Karen? Yeah. Okay. All right. So what has LACA been doing? This is about, you know, what citizens are doing as well as what the government agencies are doing. So we established a cyanobacteria monitoring program or project in 2020. We started building a database of cyanobacteria focused. We were teamed up with Virginia Tech, Dr. Schmalley at Virginia Tech. So a lot of our protocols and procedures, even our equipment, is based on what he was doing at his lab at Virginia Tech. And we're continuing that today. We've been doing this monitoring of the upper lake now for five straight years. We also started what we call Kick the HAB campaign, and that's our fundraising campaign, and primarily through donations. We've raised over $200,000. Some of that is from fundraising activities, but as I said, most of it, we're a 501c3, so it's easy for us to ask people for a tax deductible donation, and the community has responded in fantastic way with giving us more than $200,000 to execute these programs. So in 2022, we picked 4 areas of the lake with different kind of environmental conditions, different flow rates, and we weren't really testing hydrogen peroxide-based algicide to see if it works. We knew it worked. There was research that says it works. We wanted to see, okay, how much do we need to put down, and how often do we need to put it down? And we were able to achieve those objectives. And the answer is you got to put it down early, and you got to put it down often, about every 2 to 3 weeks. So for that upper 4,400 acres of the lake, we would need $1 million a year just to do algicide. And we recognize that's a Band-Aid. It doesn't fix anything. It just relieves the current problem. And then it's back again in 2 weeks if you don't do something. It's a great way for an HOA or an organization to control their area if they wanted to do that, but it is expensive and it's time consuming. In 2023, we looked at ultrasound devices. We put ultrasound devices in 4 different locations. We got 2 different companies, Hydrobioscience and Water IQ. We put them in the upper lake, and we found that ultrasound won't work up in the upper lake. Now we moved them down to the lower lake this year, and we are seeing better results in the lower lake where the flow rates aren't as high. These ultrasounds need about 3 to 4 days of exposure to actually have the effect that we're trying to achieve. And even in low flow conditions in an upper part of the lake, you just don't get that. And the other thing that we found is ultrasound is not necessarily effective on Raphidiopsis. And Raphidiopsis is what we have up in the upper lake. So we moved those things down in the lower lake, and we're seeing a little bit better performance on those this year. And then, yeah, I already talked about that. So we've been doing the microscopy with the NOAA program now for 2 years, and we'll continue to do that through, it's an annual kind of thing throughout the year, helping to build their freshwater cyanobacteria database. And then our Environmental Preservation Committee is executing funding that we've got from DuPont and from Dominion Energy to improve the aquatic vegetation along our shorelines and to do those riparian buffers up in the watershed. A lot of activity, lots of money, and lots of support to the local community. Still others. Okay, so I'm also part of the Lake Anna Advisory. I'm here today from the Lake. I always have to tell people which hat I'm wearing. I'm here for the Lake Anna Civic Association, but the Lake Anna Advisory Committee conducted a comprehensive study of the upper North Anna River in 2022. And they are executing this Lake Anna cyanobacteria mitigation and remediation program. And I'll talk about that on another slide. We've got great support from our counties. They're very supportive of, so basically this program, and I'll tell you about it, is doing that, phosphorus remediation. The reason why we named it that is because that's what's in the appropriation language. But it's a phosphorus remediation program in the upper lake. And they're very supportive of that. And they're continuously talking to the state senators and delegates about continued funding, increasing the $500,000 in the next budget back to $1 million. And they're helping us work with our senators and congressional members to hopefully get community project funding in the future. Yeah, I think that covers that. All right. So the Lake Anna cyanobacteria, again, this is a long name. Basically, it's a phosphorus remediation program. Our goal is to achieve a safe and naturally balanced biomass, phytoplankton biomass in the upper part of the lake, which we don't have today. And the upper part of the lake is this area here. That's about, probably about 4,000 acres of this total 9,600 acre portion of the public side of the lake. So in scope, so Weezer County, released an RFP last December, for the work that we wanted to accomplish. And these are all of these areas are in scope during the 5-year effort of those contracts. To achieve that goal, we have two objectives, two fairly simple objectives, easy to monitor, easy to collect data on. We know where we're at over the last 15 years in terms of total phosphorus and phosphorus levels in the upper lake. My last slide will show you kind of where we're at on that. But we're well over 30. And this tributary, which is Pamunkey Creek, consistently probably in the 90s to over 100 parts per billion of phosphorus, total phosphorus, in this tributary here. So we're eutrophic pretty much year round, in all of these areas. And our goal is to reduce that to below 30 parts per billion, through phosphorus remediation activities. And then through that, we hope to achieve the reduction and sustainment of the lower numbers of cyanobacteria cell counts, which will improve recreational conditions in the lake. And we won't have the HAB advisories, which give us bad press in the community and in the Washington, D.C. area, where a lot of the people that come visit the lake are either from Richmond or Northern Virginia. That the word gets out that we have a HAB advisory and people don't come. They don't rent boats. They don't go out on fishing tours and things like that. So it's bad for the business community. So it's important to get rid of these advisories. We don't want to get rid of them just to get rid of them. We want to do the things that's required to get the water back to a level that is safe for everyone to do their recreational activities. And as I mentioned, the Lake Anna Advisory Committee is managing that program. So this is my get off the stage slide. We got a nutrient issue, not just phosphorus. We got a nitrogen issue as well. We got a chlorophyll issue. Clay talked about the TSI. We've got that issue as well. Our program is focused, the Lake Anna cyanobacteria mitigation and remediation program is focused on mitigating phosphorus. But the other activities that we're doing up in the watershed are focused, will hopefully help reduce nitrogen and sedimentation and chlorophyll levels as well. So I do have some slides if you want to see it on the data, but I think the important thing is all of these areas are year-round over eutrophic levels, over 30 parts per billion. And we got to get those levels down. You can do it naturally through wetlands and retention ponds if you can get the money. We did a study, as I mentioned, in 2022 that noted, and it was for this part of the North Anna River only. And for just to mitigate and do the best management practice for this tributary would be about $250 million over a long period of time. Of course, the state's not going to come up with that kind of money, and it'd be hard to get the federal government to get a single lake that amount of money. So we want to pick away at things that we can do in the watershed, like riparian buffers and shoreline vegetation and those kinds of things. But there are ways to get shorter term solutions. And so the phosphorus remediation program is utilizing the Utrafix Phoslock solution, which they call Utrasorb G and Utrasorb WC in the North Anna River. So we deployed about 88,000 pounds of Utrasorb G in the North Anna River this year. And we're injecting Utrasorb WC at about a mile and a half upstream here to handle the inflows. And about 80% of our phosphorus problem is coming from the watershed. We found that out during this 2002 study. So, and then in this tributary up here, Terry's Run, we are using a calcium silicate rather than a Phoslock or Utrasorb kind of lanthanum-based product. We're using calcium. And a very innovative approach that they're using up there to handle the inflows is they're using beneficial bacteria reactors, bioreactors that basically put a lot of beneficial bacteria, bacillus, 5 or 6 different strains of bacillus, into the water to compete with the cyanobacteria for the nitrogen and phosphorus that's coming in from the tributaries and from the watershed. So this is a long-term project. We're taking small bites at the problem. John Odenkirk at DWR was very concerned. He just recently published, I don't know, published is the right word. There was an announcement that he hasn't seen the fishery this good in 30 years. And he's been monitoring the lake, as well as others, for 30 plus years. And he's concerned that this reduction in phosphorus, as probably a lot of others are, that this reduction in phosphorus is going to have a negative impact on the fishery, but we got to do something about the excess phosphorus that's in the lake. And so we're taking a very slow approach. Those objectives that I had on the last slide, the first year objective is just reduce excess phosphorus by 10%. And so we're not trying to just dump a bunch of stuff in the lake and solve the problem all in one treatment. This is a 5-year program with probably a 5 or 6-year program afterwards to continue to monitor the inflows from the watershed. So that's what's going on at both the at the governmental level and our local levels of what's going on at Lake Anna and trying to solve these HAB problems. So I'm probably about done here. So if you maybe have time for one question.
Time for a question. Anyone have a question?
You were talking about the hydrogen peroxide based algicide, and I was wondering if there's any side effects to using something like that.
Hydrogen peroxide algicides have been used for a long time. They've got at least 20 years of research. The active ingredient was PAC 27, which is the same active ingredient that's used in most hydrogen peroxide algicides. The concentration is low. If you buy toothpaste with hydrogen peroxide in it, the concentration that we put into the lake is lower than that. And so we saw no fish kills. We saw no negative impacts on the environment, nor did we expect to see any given the research that was available to us.
Remarkable job as lake managers, and you should be commended for this. And I just had a question about your upstream within the watershed neighbors. Are the politics just really, really difficult to deal with the various landowners that are upstream that are contributing especially, or are you able to venture into that?
We do struggle dealing with the landowners in the upper part of the watershed. Maybe struggles is too strong of a term, but we're not farmers. Most of us are retired government people from Northern Virginia. The farmers think we're all rich because they come to the lake and they see the houses and boats and things like that. And they're like, you know, we've been here for 100, this farm has been in our family for 100 years. I'm not fencing the cows out, and I'm going to continue to put biosolids. And these are farms right on the lake. So you're driving by going fishing and there's 50 cows right in the water right next to you. And we can't convince that farmer or many others. I was talking to Bob after his brief this morning. I think it's important to have farmers talk to farmers, or people who understand farming talk to farmers, not somebody who they can't identify with, nor can I identify with them from a professional standpoint. And so we need to do better at that. And we're looking for ways and help that we can do that, because we do have money. As you saw, DuPont and Dominion have given us $30,000 to do this kind of stuff. We're also working closely with the Friends of the Rappahannock, who have a long history of planting trees in the watershed and had great success. So we know how to do it. We've got people that can help us do it that have been doing it for years. It's just finding a landowner that'll let us do it.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we're out of time. Appreciate it, Harry.
All righty, we're going to go ahead and get started with our last round of speakers for this conference. Our next speaker is Austin Gray. Dr. Gray hails from Charleston, South Carolina, where he attended the Citadel Military College of South Carolina for his undergraduate and graduate degrees. He then attended the University of North Carolina at Greensboro for his PhD, becoming the first Black American to receive a doctorate in environmental health sciences. Currently, Dr. Gray is an assistant professor at Virginia Tech. Dr. Gray's research focuses on addressing questions related to environmental toxicology. He primarily uses physiological and ecological approaches to examine the impacts of legacy and emerging contaminants, including microplastics, nanoplastics, and pharmaceuticals, on freshwater and marine organisms. Dr. Gray currently serves on the North America Board of Directors for the Society of Environmental Toxicology and Chemistry, or CTAC. He also co-founded the CTAC North America Inclusive Diversity Committee in 2018. Welcome, Dr. Gray.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. And this is a little bit of a different talk than what's been happening for the duration of the conference. And I'll be focusing on plastics. And I've been doing plastic research, I guess now I'm coming up on 11 years. So it goes back to my time in Charleston and the coast. And my research group has done a lot of work within inland areas in Blacksburg on plastic pollution, but also microplastics that I'll talk about today. And it's gotten a lot of attention within the news and the media. You hear it as a hot buzzword, plastic pollution, microplastics. It's always out there. But for me, plastics represent something else. It's one of the greatest challenges to our environment of our day. There's plastics in every ecosystem you could think of the planet. No matter where you go, you're going to find plastics. Doesn't matter if it's Antarctica, doesn't matter if it's a remote mountain, a lake, there's plastics and microplastics present all around us. And so in consideration to, I guess, environmental science, we always think about pristine or a controlled ecosystem where you go somewhere where it's not impacted. You don't have that with plastics, especially with fresh water. No matter where you go, you're going to find microplastics. Because of this, it's a stressor to human health, environmental health, and organism. But what are plastics? And I talk about this because although we use them every day in our everyday life, although they're always around us, we don't really have a good understanding about what they truly are. Plastics themselves are derived from petrochemicals, meaning these are oil-based polymers. So, and essentially, if you think about carbon budgets and carbon sequestration, plastics are another form of carbon. Along with that, there's various properties of plastics that we use that we don't even know about, and it could be clothing. Some of the major culprits of plastic pollution go back to laundering, meaning our clothing items, nylon, polyester. These are all actual plastic polymers that are released into our environment just from washing our clothes. An example of how we've grown as a field goes back to 2013 when we did estimates. One nylon fleece would produce roughly 17,000 particles, we thought. Fast forward 10 years, we know that's actually 100,000 particles. So from one nylon fleece, when you wash it in your washing machine, it's shedding 100,000 microplastics. That's a problem. And when we think about plastics and how to fix the problem, you'll hear a lot of talks about banning, getting rid of plastics, and I caution that because in our society and for what our demands are, I don't think it's reasonable to think that we can truly get rid of plastics. I don't think that's the approach. Nor should we blame the individual consumer for buying plastics or using plastics because it's not their fault. The issue is, it goes back to the life cycle of a plastic. Out of the various types of polymers, we have a list of different polymers, and if you buy a plastic item, it has a code. That code has a number. That number means something. It tells you what kind of plastic you have. It could be PET or HDPE, or it could be polystyrene or other. Those numbers help us understand what plastics we can capture and recycle. Out of the 8 or 7 that are available, only 2 of them are easily recyclable, which tells us we don't have a problem with plastic pollution. We have a problem with capturing plastics, recycling them for further use. But when I think about plastic pollution, it's a pervasive problem because it's getting worse. Going back to 2013, when I started doing this research, we've seen a 13% increase in plastics that are produced. The reason why that's a problem is because although the research is showing us that there's negative implications of plastics, we're still seeing greater and greater amounts that are being produced but not captured. An example of the problem of plastic pollution goes into waste, mismanaged waste. You'd be surprised how much waste goes into nearby streams. An example of that being if you have a storm event, doesn't matter if you're coastal, doesn't matter if you're inland. You have a storm event, trash gets knocked over. That trash ends up on the street. It washes into a storm drain. That storm drain leads to a stream. That stream is going to carry it over a long period of time, tidal creeks, river systems, to estuaries, to where it's going to deposit on beaches, tidal creeks. 80% of all coastal plastics originate from land-based or inland systems, meaning riverine sources, showing us that although a lot of the research is dedicated on marine areas, the main culprit and the main area of focus for mitigation should be inland waters. As the plastic goes down this pathway, it's subjected to physical abrasion. It's coming in contact with rocks, roots. It's also facing UV radiation from the sun, and also microbial colonization from biofilms. And thus, that plastic over time becomes brittle. So if you were to go into the beach areas, go into the Spartina, and pick up this plastic cup, there'll be flakes on your finger. And on their finger, those are microplastics. These are the particles that you would collect from that, roughly 250 micron in size. So barely visible with the naked eye, but they're prevalent in almost every ecosystem. But when we think about microplastics, there's different classifications. One is primary, and these are things that you've seen in your tooth scrubbing or toothbrush, facial scrubs. In 2013, there was an article that came out about a dentist that was doing a cleaning of this patient's gums. What they found lodged in the gums were these microbeads. Next to that, you have facial scrubs. You can imagine all the personal care products that we utilize that have these microbeads that are used for better exfoliation. You want to buy that because you want clear skin, you want clean skin, and it washes right down the sink. These are called primary microplastics. And luckily, thanks to the research, they've been banned within personal care products since 2018. But this is what I call putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot. The major issue are secondary microplastics, meaning the macroplastics, anything bigger than 5 millimeters. These big plastic items that are out there, they're subjected to all these degradation processes. And so they fragment and they release these type of particles, fibers, fragments, foam pieces. And they make up to 81% of the microplastics we find in the environment. So it tells us, even though we have legislation to stop the spread of primary microbeads, we're not doing much to capture these secondary microplastics because they're originating from the plastic debris that's already out there. This brings me to my research group and what we do. So as I mentioned, I'm an environmental toxicologist. I care about contaminants. Microplastics is just one that I focus on a lot just because it's really easy to bring students on and train them in that type of research. It's field and lab heavy, but essentially we're equipped to look at the occurrence, distribution, fate, and impact of microplastics in aquatic habitats. So we look at freshwater and marine. And we also have field and spectroscopic techniques, basically to identify the polymers of the microplastics we collect. Here's some of me and my students in the field right now, or at least in this image, doing some field work collecting microplastics on Intex campus. But it goes back to freshwater. As mentioned, if you look up microplastics, a lot of the major research that's been done has been coastal. And I'm guilty of that. My work started there in 2013 in Charleston, South Carolina, looking at coastal systems. But since coming to Virginia Tech, my work has primarily been focused on freshwater. Why freshwater? It's a precious resource where we have thousands of synthetic chemicals that are being released into our freshwater daily. We don't know the implications of what that means for us in regards to a resource we need for our livelihood. We also don't think about the fact that that freshwater typically leads to reservoirs. Those reservoirs are used for drinking water. An assessment globally, we've shown that 94%, roughly almost 95% of all U.S. tap water contains microplastic fibers. I've done assessments in Blacksburg, and that ranges between 10 to 18 particles per liter every day that people consume, showing that microplastics, while they're an environmental occurrence, environmental stressor, they're a direct pathway to human health. This leads to the One Health approach, where we look at environmental health, animal health, and human health. Because of the connection of water, water reaches various types of landscapes, but also different types of people, all types of backgrounds. So microplastics is that unique contaminant that is non-discriminatory. Regardless, when you think about environmental justice, typically disproportionate or disadvantaged communities are subjected to disproportionate exposure. Microplastics knows no bounds. You can be in an affluent community or in a disadvantaged community. You still are exposed to microplastics. And so because of this leads to various research questions or pressing concerns. One being the size and shape toxicity. meaning that microplastics are out there in various shapes, sizes. In doing so, when they're exposed to different organisms, they have different impacts. There's a lot of developmental alterations because plastics themselves have many chemicals and additives that can leach out. These chemicals and additives can have developmental alterations. They can also be a Trojan horse. Because plastics are typically hydrophobic, they bind a lot of organic contaminants. You think about PFAS, there's a lot of talk about PFAS. Well, PFAS can bind to the surface of plastics. So if you ingest plastics in your water or through food, seafood typically, you might be also getting a higher amount of PFAS because of the surface area of these plastics. We deal with the inhalation and ingestion by humans, as I mentioned, in the air, atmospheric deposition. We can breathe it. We can also eat it through our food. Microplastics or nanoplastics, more importantly, translocate into our cells, causing stress responses, but also DNA alterations. And lastly, the unknown effects to humans. And there's been several research studies that have been done that have published studies looking at microplastics found in placentas, found in human blood, found within linking them to various health issues, meaning that were found in the New England Journal of Medicine. They've recently published that microplastics end up in arteries, PVC particles specifically. It creates a substrate for plaque to build up around. And plaque builds up within your arteries that leads to hardening or atherosclerosis, showing that it may not be lifestyle, may not be your diet that can influence atherosclerosis. It could simply just be exposure to microplastics. This is just laying the foundation that this is all the issues surrounding microplastics and why it's important. And going back into my time at the Citadel until now, roughly again, almost 10 years, we started this, I guess, this framework of how we look at plastics. For me, it's a global problem in my own backyard. Wherever I am, whether it's in graduate school or as a professor at Virginia Tech, I do research in my community, even though it has a global appeal, it's more so derived about what's affecting those around them. So we have microplastics occurrences documented globally. The abundance is increasing. It's the same size range as some food items in aquatic systems. And there's various toxicological concerns. And so this is just an overview of the work that I've done before. I'm not going to go into detail about these projects. I have certain ones I want to talk about today, but essentially it's just going over primary and macroplastic debris. We've done work looking at that within freshwater and coastal systems. Microplastic debris, done that as well. Various toxicological concerns, we published work on that as well. But I want to highlight another part, stream ecosystems, the degradation of plastics within streams. As I mentioned, we have a lot of plastic waste that enter freshwater systems. 80% of all coastal plastics come from inland riverine systems, and those rivers are fed by low-order streams. Roughly 70% of total stream length in the United States come from small-order streams. In Blacksburg, this is a great laboratory to teach students and also design really interesting research projects because in the Blacksburg, it's a college town. There's not much there, but the college is a big draw. You can imagine what happens in a college town. Involved in college, parties, hanging out, but also littering. There's a lot of trash within Blacksburg. We happen to have a stream that runs through our campus, Strubles Creek. So you have different inputs. And the question goes into, as plastics enter the stream, there's various things that can happen when it enters the stream. It doesn't just get transported directly to the coast. Especially within Blacksburg, the water actually goes into the Mississippi. It doesn't go to the Atlantic. If you have a plastic item, it has a long journey before it reaches a coastal system. Along that journey, you have plastic bags that can be caught within rocks. Bottles that can get captured, where they deal with physical abrasion, UV radiation, microbial degradation from the colonization of biofilms. In doing so, these are all facilities where microplastics are produced. But what we don't know, one of the pressing concerns is, how long does it take for a macroplastic item to start producing microplastics? So we've done this before. When I was at the Citadel in 2016, we found within tidal creeks or salt marshes, imagine salt marshes. These are end terminals of plastics. This is where they end up at the end of their journey. It takes 4 to 8 weeks to produce microplastics within that type of habitat. But we don't know how long does it take within an urban stream or a forested stream. I say urban and forested because along stream types, there's various types of environments that streams are found within. Urban areas, you can imagine them flashier. They have altered morphology, less canopy cover, so more UV degradation. You have forested streams that do have more canopy cover. but does degradation differ between these habitats? So this was a year-long study. This is my PhD student, Katie Mayer. She championed this effort, but essentially we went out and similar if anybody's seen any leaf decomposition studies. We took glass fiber bags, we filled them with common polymers and plastics. We had polyethylene terephthalate, low density polyethylene, polystyrene, packing peanuts, and cellulose as a natural comparison. And we buried our bags within stream sites, urban and stream sites in Blacksburg. We tracked it over a year. So we took samples over the course of a year. Each individual bag was a sampling point. From there, we then looked at degradation, meaning the fragmentation of microplastics from these items. We also looked at the surface characterization using FTIR to see how the surface chemistry changed as well. We did SEM imaging to see whether or not there was any biofilm colonization that we can monitor. And over a course of a year, saw degradation. This is just images of the plastics when they were collected at 8 months. So you can imagine a lot of that green biofilm development on the plastics, which I'll get to a little bit later. So here we have the degradation of plastics. This is how they looked when they were before they were deployed, clean, controlled. Afterwards, we see this dense biofilm. It's vibrant green. It's very present, very evident within our samples. And then we have the graph, and I won't expect you to read that. That's a lot going on. But what we're seeing here is that within 2 weeks, within an urban stream environment, microplastics are being produced from macroplastics. So although in terminals like salt marshes, it takes 4 to 8 weeks, it's happening faster. And as I mentioned, when a plastic item enters the stream, it has a long journey. So along that journey, it's producing an exorbitant amount of microplastics that by the time it reaches a tidal creek, it's already been degraded well enough where you're introducing thousands to millions of types of particles to that system, showing the mitigation. We really need to focus on inland areas and not just the coastal waters. This is the SEM image, and I'll get a little closer in the next picture. But we wanted to look at the close actual surface of the plastic with the biofilm to figure out, is it bacteria, is it algae, is it fungus? And that was my exam. I thought it would be that. But what we found was that diatoms riddled the surface of these plastics. And we did XPS analysis to then show that silica, which most diatoms, again, all diatoms are made of silica. Silica is basically just glass. So you can imagine if they're being colonized by diatoms with these glass-like structure shells, that could be causing a physical abrasion. So although we have rocks, we have UV, we have microbes. If you look at the plastic here, we have clean plastics. Here we have the biofilm, see the clear biofilm. And here we remove the biofilm. What do we notice? We have micro cracks here. We have pits, holes, punctures, showing that diatoms might be a crucial factor in the degradation of plastics within urban and forested streams. Because regardless of the stream type, we have very much the same similar assemblage of diatoms. That leads to more questions about why diatoms specifically colonize these plastics, but it shows that our understanding of degradation is very nuanced. You aren't thinking of certain aspects of the environment. So the major takeaway for this study is that microplastics were produced in as little as 2 weeks. The urban stream did have higher degradation, which we kind of expected. Imagine flashier flows, so you have more hydrolysis, more increased water flow velocity. You have less canopy cover. You have more UV degradation playing a role. And that degradation or fragmentation of plastics be influenced by various factors and not just UV. And because we looked at microplastics within the system, we saw that they're degrading, they're fragmenting into microplastics. That then leads to the biota that inhabit these areas. Freshwater biodiversity is important. There's a lot of factors that are influencing their declines. I'm not saying it's just plastics, but plastic is a culprit. And so this led to an assessment looking at microplastic body burden in native and non-native crayfish. Crayfish are an important species. They're ecosystem engineers, play a key role as keystone species in regards to intermediate predator and prey. And so what happens to their population, how that's affected by microplastics is important and worth noting. Because microplastics have entered every ecosystem, doesn't matter where you are, you're going to find them. So that means that there are organisms that are present. They may be exposed to them and they may be removing them. So here we looked at Tom's Creek, which is another stream that is in Blacksburg here. It's more what we classify as semi-rural, so it's not as developed. And then we have Struvel's Creek, which is our urban stream. We had 5 sites along each stream looking at native and non-native crayfish. For our non-native, we looked at Faxonius cristavarius. This is a non-native species that has been dominating our area, being the most dominant crayfish species, outcompeting the natives. Then we have Civic appalachiensis, which is a more newly identified species of crayfish, but also is specific or at least endemic to the greater New River basins of Virginia and West Virginia. The question or the goal for this is to assess the natural populations. Are we seeing differences within microplastic accumulation within or body burden within these crayfish species? Crayfish also serve as bioindicators of pollution. We can find a way to use non-native crayfish as a means to indicate microplastic pollution. It can help us better understand what's present, because collecting water and sediment takes a lot of time. Water is transient, so it's not a really good measure of what's there in your system fully. And then sediments are long-term accumulation. Crayfish, they migrate, they disperse at different rates, but they could be used as bioindicators if we do a better job of understanding the occurrences of microplastics. So here we have our semi-rural stream, or Tom's Creek, and we have the urban stream. I'm not going to ask you to go through and break it down to a really specific level, but in this assessment, this is the first comparative assessment of microplastics within native and non-native crayfish. We've seen that there is an interactive effect of season, site, and nativity, meaning that the season you're in, urban versus forested streams, and the species of crayfish can influence microplastic accumulation. But we found greater amounts of microplastics in our non-native crayfish and typically higher levels within our urban stream. So it shows that there is a difference depending on site, but also species. And because these non-native crayfish are becoming more and more abundant, they may be capturing a greater amount of microplastics. That is a concern that I'll get to in a second. Here is just a chord plot. Here we have the compartments: surface water, sediment, and crayfish. We collected microplastics from surface water, sediment, and crayfish to see if there's a link, meaning that are crayfish capturing the same amount of microplastics of the same types, or are they getting them from other sources, potentially through the food? What we see here is there's more microplastic diversity than the crayfish than our environmental compartments, which means another source potentially. That source being lower trophic level organisms. 81% of the particles we collected were plastic. 10% of them were rubber or tire roadwear particles, which are another source of microplastic. And polypropylene was the most common polymer amongst all compartments, which makes sense. Polypropylene and polyethylene are the two common most found polymers within freshwater. This is of concern because if crayfish are accumulating microplastics, what did I mention previously? They have chemicals, additives that may be leaching. These leachates can also cause various unknown toxicological concerns. It also introduces them into the food web. You think about hellbenders or salamanders that consume crayfish. This is another means for trophic transfer of microplastics to the food web. So even though they might be present within surface water and sediment, these items are moving through the food web at a rate and also ways that we don't truly understand. So it's important to monitor and understand and preserve freshwater biodiversity. We have to start looking at contaminants like microplastics that are very persistent. Lastly, this is a project that I just wrapped up with Tina Dura in Geosciences, and we are looking at microplastic pollution within the Chesapeake Bay. Tina is a paleoseismologist, so we essentially are using sediment records to look at microplastics. Where if you take a sediment core and you date it, can we use that to track microplastic pollution over time? The first synthetic rubber was made in 1897, Bakelite, and then the first synthetic plastic was made in 1907. So over 100 years of plastic production. But you can imagine after World War II, that expanded drastically. So we're using this essentially to understand, can we predict or can we see across time when microplastics show up in the Chesapeake Bay? Some of the research questions that we have going into it is, how has microplastic concentration changed over time? Are sediment cores an accurate representation or media to actually track that? And what's the relationship of plastic concentration and composition in regards to frequency of tidal inundation? So why Chesapeake Bay? Chesapeake Bay is an area where it's densely populated. It has accelerated sea level rise. It's accelerated erosion, and it's an abundant source of microplastics. We looked at it from the bay side and the sea side. Wanted to see the bay side because the bay side represents microplastics that might be coming in from the rivers, inland areas. And then the sea side is microplastics that may be coming from the river, but also from ocean sources. This has also led to the microplastic summer research experience we had. We took 5 geoscience and biological sciences undergrads. This is the first, basically an REU of its type, and they've learned to do field work, going out there and collecting sediment cores out in the Chesapeake Bay. We also brought them back to the laboratory where they did microplastic extractions and used a sophisticated instrument to identify the polymer type of those plastics. So it was a really cool experience. It's something that I think they're still working on the project now, and it's a really good opportunity for them to just learn about the field of microplastics. So essentially, they went out and they collected cores. Here's an example of the core that they collected. This was from Saxis. They brought it back where they did grain size analysis. We have a collaborator at ECU that did the dating, meaning that we use cesium dating to identify the year of the sediment. Then we also came back to the lab, did some microplastic extraction. So this is an example of a fiber bundle extracted from the sediment. And we characterized it in my lab as well. Here's a picture of some of the students out in the field. But I think they had a much better time in the field collecting samples in the lab and having to sift through dirt. But it was ultimately still a good positive experience overall. And looking at some of our findings from the Bay side, just to take you through this image and what we're looking at, we have the core, composition of the core, we have essentially, so 1950 is identified with the star. Everything above the star is post 1950, anything below is before 1950. What do we see? We see a really interesting profile of polymer types where prior to the 1950s, we see a lot of polystyrene, a lot of nylon, and then more recently, we see a lot of polyethylene terephthalate and polystyrene, HDPE. So a more diverse assemblage of plastics, which shows that over time, different diversities of plastics are accumulating in the sediment. And we also see over time, there's generally an increase. So at this graph, it shows the abundance microplastics per gram of sediment. And essentially over time, outside of this one site, we're seeing a trend where it's generally increasing over time. So this is the bay side. This is the side that's basically being fed by rivers. It's not as inundated. It's not dealing with the same wave action that you would find on the seaside where there's a lot of high energy waves that may clash against the sediment. And so when we look at the seaside, we thought we would see a similar trend, but we didn't. Actually saw a flip. So PET and polystyrene here, and you flip that around and you get a more diverse assemblage on the seaside at really low levels. And then we see polystyrene. So more diversity here, less diversity up top. And this could be essentially derived from the flooding, the amount of actual changes within sea level, essentially the sediment being mixed up over time. So it may not be the best proxy. And that's basically what this told us is on the seaside, it may not be a better indicator of tracking microplastic pollution. From the bay side, it might be better to use that as a proxy to look at microplastics over time. But this is all preliminary, so we're still doing work right now. We just went back out and did some more sampling and basically just trying to repeat this over and over again, but essentially using the Chesapeake Bay as a study system. So outside of that, some of the research priorities of my lab go into, we also have a 5-year study in NOAA, looking at bottlenose dolphins, tracking microplastics within dolphin populations. We're looking at, with NIEHS, microplastics in oysters, and then looking at leachates from tires and how they affect aquatic organisms. But for Virginia, major priority of emphasis is microplastics in drinking water. There's been House Bill 33 that has been looking at trying to set established record, or at least advisory guidelines of microplastics within drinking water. The goal is to essentially do what California has done, have regulatory practices, standardized practices, and advisory levels to monitor microplastics in drinking water, because that's a direct impact on human health. And with that, I wrap up my presentation and I will take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Greg. All righty, do we have a burning question or two?
Said at the beginning of your talk that polymers are hard to recycle. Why? Is it because of cost, politics, or some technical reason?
So once you like polymers to a certain temperature, they're not able to be the bonds are broken so much. So it's more so a matter of
But if you separate them as solids, and then you could chip them up and then recycle them, so you could separate using light uh, spectroscopy to separate the solids, and then you could reprocess them individually, like PET versus polypropylene.
Yeah, that's what.
Do we have another question?
I was just curious if you had a perspective on like the effectiveness or usefulness of like plastic bag bans or bag fees. More cities are implementing those. It's kind of hard to track if they're really effective. I didn't know if you had any thoughts on those.
Yeah, so they're effective in the sense of you're thinking about reducing single-use plastics. But when I was in Charleston, we did a lot of work with localities, sending at town hall meetings about our findings. And they introduced House Bill 254, I think is the name. So essentially became a ban on bans. It banned towns from banning plastics. But it introduced a really good perspective for me because it was an economic side. And I think that brings it to the conversation that you think about plastic and solution or plastic solutions. It has to be multiple people talking about it. But I never thought about the industry of people losing their job because of the factory shutting down. And so that means someone's losing their job, they can't feed their family. And again, it's not their fault. That's why I think the conversation is more nuanced, where we should include more people from different backgrounds. It's not just me as a scientist telling you the shock and awe of the research. It should be a lot of us who are in different sectors talking about what are realistic solutions to solve the problem.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Gray. Alrighty. Our final speaker of the day is Dr. Kong Zia. Dr. Zia is a professor in environmental chemistry with the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech. She is also Associate Director of the Virginia Agricultural Experiment Station and the Director of the Center for Advanced Innovation in Agriculture in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at Virginia Tech. She holds bachelor, master, and doctoral degrees in soil chemistry. Her research focuses on understanding the environmental occurrence, fate, impact, and remediation of organic contaminants, including PFAS and other emerging contaminants. Welcome, Dr. Zia.
Well, thank you for the introduction. Thank you all for sticking around into the last talk in this gloomy day. Well, more gloomy news before you leave for the day. I am going to talk about the research findings on through various projects that are ongoing at Virginia Tech, for which I'm either the lead PI or co-PI. So we focus on what's happening in Virginia related to PFAS. So the title is Environmental Occurrence of PFAS in Virginia. The question is, well, I ask myself very often this question. I asked some of you this question in last year's presentation related to PFAS. So where should this never-ending or forever chemical, forever never-ending battle, where should it begin? Where should it end? So our work, so the multiple projects involve multiple students. So I would like to thank my graduate student, Ava, another graduate student, Savannah and Michael. They have done tremendous work, and as well as this long list of collaborators and citizen scientists from Rockbridge Conservation Group in Virginia, and Malcolm Taylor, who is from the Washington Suburban Sanitation Commission. And also he's actively involved with Mid-Atlantic Biosolid Association. So just a little bit background. So exactly how many compounds are we talking about? I know you guys know we're talking about a lot, but there's a progression throughout time. So in 2020, the commonly cited number of PFAS that we're concerned about was 1,400. And they talk about, well, 200 uses and they're resulting in 1,400 PFAS. And then in 2023, this report suggests that we're dealing with more than 16,000 PFAS. So a lot of the consumer products contain PFAS. So this is a report that put out last year. And in that report, it shows the major U.S. manufacturer or where the import, locations are in the U.S., mostly concentrated on the East Coast. So we're talking about each year more than 2 billion pounds of PFAS are imported for various or manufactured in the U.S. for various uses. So many of you have seen this tree called the PFAS trees. Basically, we keep adding leaves and branches on this tree, from 1,400 PFAS compounds. Now we're talking about 16,000. And I guarantee you this tree continues to grow. So this is a fast growing tree. And our problem is that we cannot cut it down fast enough. Just a little bit timeline of PFAS. And it was, again, a human invention. It was back in the 1930s and has been used and manufactured up to nowadays. We actually knew the environmental health concern back in the 1960s or 1970s. But at the time, it was more focused on it's other people's problem or the manufacturer problem. So the general public were not aware of the concerns until we have better detection methods. And then all of a sudden we're seeing PFAS everywhere. And then the question is, okay, what's the concern? And then more concerns are reviewed and then we freak out, right? So then that leads to phase out and reduction and alternatives. So this is a general timeline. So regulation by EPA started in 2016. At the time you notice, and it was the lifetime health advisory level was 70 parts per trillion. At the time, it was considered outrageous low. And then politicians involved, and that pushed the regulation forward. 2021, EPA decided to monitor more PFAS in addition to PFOA, PFOS. So in 2022, when I saw this proposed health advisory levels at 0.004 parts per trillion, I fell off the chair, right? This is extremely low level. And then last year, EPA proposed action level for PFAS in drinking water. And then as April this year become finalized. So the first ever national drinking water standard for PFAS for 6 compounds. And now you notice the MCL levels are at 4 parts per trillion for drinking water. And then there's a concept of health index of 1 that involves 4 compounds besides PFOA and PFOS. And here's a calculation here. We don't need to get into that detail, but as you can see that this level still very, very low level. We're talking about parts per trillion. So the timeline for implement this drinking water standard is very, very aggressive. So in April, the standard got pushed out, and our goal is by, within 5 years, we're requiring all the utilities that being able to test PFAS and being able to remediate the issue and to bring down the PFAS below the MCL levels. This is a very, very daunting task, and we need tremendous amount of investment in along this line to achieve this goal. Okay, so in addition to the standard for the drinking water standard, and at the same time, in April this year, PFOA, PFOS are considered hazardous substance under the Superfund law. So again, more investment, more testing, and more remediation efforts are needed because they're under the Superfund law. So here's the problem. I mentioned that currently we're talking about more than 16,000 PFAS, but existing EPA analytical method can only detect up to 40 PFAS compound. And scientists are working on and developing new method to detect more compounds, but that progress is very slow. So here's a report on the additional 11 compounds in addition to the 40 PFAS that maybe can be detected, but using super expensive equipment. So here's the problem. Testing PFAS requires expensive and sensitive analytical instrument. How many of water utility can afford it? Okay. And on top of that, we need skilled analysts to do this work. So my lab has been doing PFAS analysis since, well, in the past at least 5 years. Let me tell you, it is not an easy work. So I want to share with you some of the, well, the PFAS related projects that currently ongoing at Virginia Tech. I'm involved as PI or co-PI on those projects. Basically, we're touching a lot of environmental matrices in Virginia. And so we have a study, ongoing study looking at PFAS in rural private well water. We are also looking at PFAS in the coastal stormwater system. We are looking at PFAS in the agriculture system. And there's another new project. We're looking at PFAS in the aquifer recharge system. So as you can see that we've been receiving funding from various agencies to for our work. So let me share with you really briefly the key findings that for each project that we're involved with. So PFAS in the rural private well water. This study, the results being published recently. So initially we collected well water samples through the Virginia Cooperative Extension, the Virginia Household Water Quality Program. So the 10 water samples from Roland County, 10 from Floyd County, and we focus on point of entry and point of use for this private well system. We have a really good instrument in our lab. So here's just shows the method reporting limits is well below the required reporting limit by EPA. Okay, so this is a very busy slide. So what are the key findings for the private well water? First question, do we detect PFAS? Yes. About 85% of point of entry samples, we detect at least one PFAS compound. About 76% of point of use water sample, we detect at least one PFAS compound. So what the second question is, what kind of PFAS compound are we detecting? Well, it depends. Depends on the piping system, the history of the well, so a variety of factors. So we're not seeing consistently one or the other like showing up in our water. It really truly varies. Where are the sources? Where are they coming from? Our preliminary study have suggested that maybe we should look at well construction materials. Maybe we should look at the piping system from the well to your faucet. And guess what? We have seen, a lot of Teflon tapes and Teflon paste along the piping system, right? They are the major source of PFAS. And how about others? So that question itself should lead to several extensive study. So how does it compare to municipal water? So far, the water we have seen, the level of PFAS tend to be higher than the municipal PFAS in municipal water. But how does it compare to the EPA drinking water standard for PFAS? So this table just reminds you the current standards. Now this busy figure, what I want to show you is that 3 out of the 20 households, PFOA and PFOS, that's typo, that should be PFO. Only 3 out of the 20 household, we detected higher than 4 parts per trillion PFOA or PFOS. Now, if you look at other 4 EPA regulated PFAS compounds, and which we use hazardous index, and we saw only 1 household that exceed that household index, right? So that's the 20 households from Roland County and Floyd County. And we look at outside and inside samples. Okay, so now let's look at the rural surface water and also coastal stormwater system. Biosolid, we point fingers at biosolid a lot. So exactly what have we seen for the mid-Atlantic biosolid in terms of PFAS level? And then last is the presence of PFAS in the soil. We focus on agricultural soil. So far, we have focused on our investigation on pasture land, and there's a reason for that. Okay, so PFAS in the rural surface water and urban stormwater system. What are the key findings? If you look at the 2 figures on this side, surface water, we focus on the Rockbridge County. We collected surface water, 27 surface water. And so we tested PFAS. And then for the sediment, we collected sediment, 14 sediments. And then what we end up doing, we separate the water that trapped in the sediment and then the true sediment. We tested PFAS separately. So the black bars for water, flowing water, and the orange bar is for the sediment, the poor water in the sediment. And then the gray bar is for the concentration of PFAS in the sediment itself. So the top figure shows the total PFAS, and the bottom is we focus on PFOA and PFOS. So every single sample we tested, we found PFAS at different levels, of course. And we found that most of PFAS actually concentrated in the sediment. And then we found PFAS level in the poor water trapped in the sediment higher than what we detected in the flowing water. Now, the 2 figures on this side, I have my direction wrong. But anyway, those are for the stormwater system. We look at the stormwater system from 4 Virginia coastal urban communities. Again, the top one is for total PFAS, the bottom one for PFOA plus PFOS. And we look at flowing water in the stormwater system. We collected sediment and we separate the poor water in the sediment. Now, I want you to pay attention to the y-axis. That's the concentration. They're all in the parts per trillion. But look at PFAS in the stormwater system versus in the surface system. Look at the y-axis. We are in general looking at 100 times higher of PFAS in urban stormwater system than the surface rural surface water. So those pictures shows the locations where we collect the urban stormwater samples. So now, in general, sediments is a trap of PFAS. Current input and historical input, it's a trap. So it's kind of like a time bomb, right? So every time there's a disturbance, you should expect that this exchange between the sorbed PFAS absorbed on the solid phase and the PFAS that end up in the poor water of the sediment, there's an exchange. But when you have disturbance and there's a further transfer of PFAS from the sediment phase into water phase. So sediment is truly a water reservoir for PFAS, regardless what system you're looking at. So that's the second take-home message. So Mid-Atlantic biosolids. We analyzed 18 different biosolids from 18 different wastewater treatment plants in the Mid-Atlantic region. And if you look at the y-axis, a very high number, right? And so we are talking about parts per billion, low parts per billion level now. The figure on the left is total, and right is on the is PFAS plus PFOA plus PFAS. So I want to point out the major finding here. If you look at the PFAS in the water phase from the biosolids, we call those water extractable. And by definition, they are more mobile and more bioavailable than the PFAS that trapped in the solid phase of biosolids. As you can see that majority of PFAS and trapped in the solid phase. Now the question is, what's the exchange rate once you put biosolids into the environment, right? So that's a question that remains to be answered. But anyways, do we see a lot of PFAS in the biosolid? Yes, we do. Well, because we use it, right? We use PFAS, of course. And then it also depends on the type of wastewater treatment plant we're looking at. The signature of the composition of different PFAS compounds different. For example, this one, the same treatment plants, the train that receiving industrial input versus a rural collection area, and you see that the signature different, but the total amount not that different. Okay. In the findings for PFAS in soil from Virginia pasture soil field, why are we focusing on the pasture land? Well, you guys probably have seen this kind of report, right? Cows eat the grass is growing on the field that receiving biosolid application. So we are pointing the fingers to biosolid application, right? And then, well, PFAS are detected in milk. Therefore, it's probably the contribution from biosolid application. So is that really true, right? So we want to really try to figure out this we're pointing in the correct direction or not. So what we end up doing is, first we went to different farms and that we know they receive biosolid application. We asked the farmers to give us permission to collect soil samples from their field to do the PFAS analysis. And you can guess what the answers from the farmers. They don't want that to be done. I don't blame them, because that data will lead to their particular farm, right? So what do we do? Then I got hold of this data that's showing the cumulative 5-year cumulative biosolid application at different Virginia counties. This is the data from DEQ. And so we put on the map here, and you see that half the state, actually there's no biosolid application, right? And then the red ones are the counties receive the highest biosolid application. So we know that we receive soil sample submission from farmers all over the state, that they sent the soil sample to our soil testing lab for nutrient management, for nutrient analysis. So we link the two together, right? Here we have this every year, tens of thousands of samples, soil samples submitted to Virginia Tech. But can we tap into this rather than go knock on individual farmer's door, right? So we end up pulling 100 soil samples randomly from some targeted counties. And the reason the counties that were selected were based on this map here, the cumulative biosolid application in the past 5 years. Now, to protect the submitter's identity, we told soil testing lab, do not tell us where this, which farm the soil sample is from. Just tell us which county that is from. So that's our way of protecting the farmers. but the disadvantage for that is that we don't know the biosolid application history for a particular soil sample from a farm, from a county that we know that receiving biosolids. Okay, that's a disadvantage. But we know the soil samples from the counties without biosolid application, right? And our hypothesis is that maybe we were not going to see PFAS in their soil. If we see the PFAS in the soil from the county that received biosolid application, then we can say, it's biosolid, right? So to our surprise, this is the data. So total PFAS versus just PFOA, PFOS. So the x-axis is no application, soils from the counties without biosolid application, and then different rate all the way to the highest, up to 50,000 tons within 5 years. That's accumulated rate. And guess what? We are surprised. Every single samples from the counties without biosolid application, we actually detected PFAS. And if you look at the y-axis, the concentration is the thousands parts per trillion. We were really surprised about that. Now, we only saw a huge jump for the county that was the highest biosolid application rate. And the ones with lower ones, we really don't see much of difference compared to the county without biosolid application. So here's a map showing the soils without biosolid application from the counties, all the green color. And this is the range for total PFAS. And this one here from soil sample from Shenandoah County, the highest level, both for total and PFOA and PFOS. And then, so every county, right, without biosolid application. And then we look at the profiles, it really is all over the place. But one thing is PFOS really jump out of all the samples we have tested compared to PFOS. Now, PFAS in the pasture soil from counties with 5-year accumulated biosolid rate at the highest level, 20 to 50,000 dry ton during that 5 years. And this is the level we saw. Again, the profile of PFAS is very complicated, but PFOS again, it's very significant, but PFOA is also jumping out of all those pie chart now. So if you compare what we saw in the soil from the county with highest biosolid application versus county without, and we really don't see a whole lot of difference. That got us thinking, pointing finger at biosolids. Is biosolid sole source, right, for PFAS that present in our farmland? So then I like the back of envelope calculation. So I found this Virginia law regulating the maximum, the worst case scenario for biosolid application per acre per application. So I know the concentration, the worst case scenario, mid-Atlantic biosolids, I have analyzed so far is about 8,000 parts per trillion. So I know the volume per acre, and we can assume at the PFAS applied, it stays in the top 15 centimeter of soil, let's say. And then at the end, my back of envelope calculation for PFAS concentration in the soil is about 430 parts per trillion. And this is what we saw here for the counties that receive biosolid application. So it's in the ballpark, but less than some of the higher level, what other improvement. So then I thought, well, we look at, the flowing water, we look at biosolid, what else we haven't looked at? Well, things falling from the sky. So I did a little research and look at PFAS concentration in rainwater. And this is the only article I found, and they detected PFAS, PFOA, PFOS concentration at various level in the rainwater from the Ohio Valley, which is our neighbor. So let's use this as a calculation, back to the envelope calculation. Let's use the worst case scenario, 32 parts per trillion in the rainwater. And let's say, well, we know the average rainfall accumulation in Virginia, right? About 45 inches, and that's the volume. And again, for 1 acres of land, then this is our conclusion. Really crude back envelope calculation, 148 parts per trillion. So compare this number with the 400 parts per trillion from the biosolid input. This is not an insignificant number. Okay, so right now we are collecting rainwater samples around Virginia. We are in the middle of testing PFAS in rainwater. And the levels of PFAS in the rainwater we have tested so far is well within this range that reported for the Ohio Valley. Okay, so that indicates that PFAS is probably in every raindrop in the US. Okay, that's another sad news. What's next? So our work never ends, and because we have a lot of questions, and so we're testing more private well water, and we're testing more farm soil. So far, we have focused on pasture land, but we're expanding to other type of agriculture systems. We are conducting controlled field study in one of our agriculture experiment station in which we apply biosolid to pasture land using realistic application rate and realistic application method. And we're going to track the PFAS from the biosolids, the soil, and plant uptake. We see plant uptake, perhaps we're going to do some cow study, right? To look at really end up in the milk or not. Since we have found tremendous amount of PFAS in the stormwater system, and then we have a recently Sea Grants funded project to look at, can we use constructed wetland to mitigate PFAS in the stormwater? So this is a brand new project here. Okay, so some of you have seen this really complicated figure, which basically shows the sources and PFAS pathway in the environment. That leads back to this question. Where is the battle begin? Where should it end? And some of you have seen this before in my past, presentation. Basically, my question is, you as a consumer, do you want a perfect egg in the morning? Do you want a clean behind in the morning? Do you want a beautiful lipsticks in the morning? It's because a lot of those products contain PFAS. So you as a consumer, you need to decide what can you contribute to reduce the usage of consumer products that containing PFAS so that it can drive the production down at the very source, the manufacturer. Only then we can reduce the input of PFAS into wastewater treatment plants, into the air, right? And into the landfill. That's where our battle should begin. And hopefully it will end the battle there from the consumer level and the manufacturer level. So I would like to thank all the funding agencies and the supporting unit for various work we've been doing. And thank you so much for listening to this talk. And at the end of the day, it's not very exciting. It's gloomy. So
Thank you, Dr. Zier. Does anyone have any questions?
Fine. Circle size, sands, muds?
That is a really great question. And we don't have the funding to analyze in detail the type of sediment. But based on visual observation, the sticky ones tend to have a higher PFAS, which makes sense, right? Higher organic matter and that tend to absorb more PFAS. But that's a great question, great research question.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Dr. Zia.
Thank you.
All righty. Thank you to all of our speakers today. Let's give them all a round of applause. We appreciate their time and the information they provided. I know I've learned a great deal from this conference, and I'm sure you all have as well. Thank you for showing your interest in Virginia's water resources by your participation here today. Thank you also to our sponsors who made this event possible, and our 4 exhibitors, the U.S. Geological Survey, YSI, VACS, and TechZone. Also to our partners, the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Virginia Public Safety Training Center, Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and Virginia Water Resources Research Center at Virginia Tech. Thank you to the members of the Council Steering Committee who assisted in planning and implementing this event as well. It takes a lot of work to put on a conference like this, and we appreciate the generosity of all who have helped put it together. As a reminder, anyone with interest in water monitoring in Virginia can join the Virginia Water Monitoring Council. If you are not already a member of the Virginia Water Monitoring Council, please consider joining us. Send your contact information to vwmc@vt.edu, which is up there? No. Okay. It's on the website. You can learn more about the council from our website. The address is shown on this slide right there. To wrap up the 2024 Virginia Water Monitoring Council Conference, I have a few reminders. We will send a link to the recorded presentations to all registrants in the coming days. On the slide is a QR code you can scan to reach an online conference evaluation form for today's event. We will also email a link to the survey to you. We request that all attendees complete the survey to help provide feedback on your experience today. Your input will help us plan future events, and it should only take a few minutes. You can pick up your certificate of attendance as you leave there in the back of the room. And this concludes the 2024 Virginia Water Monitoring Council Conference. We thank all of you for attending, and we hope you have a safe trip home.